A man who buried his past to raise his daughter. A woman whose billion-dollar empire couldn't stop a bullet. And the 30 seconds that changed everything. If this story grips you from the very first line, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now settle in, because this one doesn't let go. The jewelry store smelled like money. That was the first thing Logan Barrett noticed when he pushed through the glass door. That particular blend of polished wood, cool air conditioning, and something faintly floral that rich places always piped in to make you feel like you belonged there, even when you clearly didn't. He didn't belong there. He knew it. The woman behind the counter in the cream blazer knew it. The security guard posted near the entrance, a kid maybe 22 years old with a badge that looked newer than his shoes, probably knew it too. Logan was wearing work boots with dried concrete on the left heel, jeans with a tear at the right knee that he'd been meaning to patch for 3 weeks, and a gray Henley that had been washed enough times that the color had gone soft. He had the hands of someone who worked outside, knuckles a little thick, a scar running along the base of his right thumb from a table saw incident 2 years back that he'd wrapped himself with electrical tape and kept working through because he'd had a deadline and a foreman breathing down his neck. He was 40 years old and he looked every year of it. "Daddy, look." Sophie tugged at his hand and pointed toward a display case near the back wall where a collection of birthstone bracelets were arranged on a white velvet pad. Her 7th birthday was in 3 weeks. She had told him twice that she didn't want anything, that she was fine, and he had understood both times that she was saying the opposite. "I see it," he said. "It's not for me," she said immediately, looking up at him with brown eyes that still got him in the chest every single time. She had her mother's eyes. She had Dana's stubborn chin, too, and the same habit of tucking her hair behind one ear when she was thinking hard about something. "It's just pretty." "Sure. I'm just looking." "I know, Soph." She was already moving toward it, fingers pressed flat against the glass of the display case, breath fogging a small circle on the surface. Logan followed, scanning the store the way he always did. Not because he expected anything, just because the habit was baked into him deep enough that he couldn't turn it off. Exits. The front door he'd come through and a door marked staff only near the back left corner. Windows. 2 large ones facing the street, plate glass, the kind that would shatter rather than spider. Customers. 3, besides himself and Sophie. A couple in their 50s near the rings, the woman holding her husband's arm while he squinted at something the sales clerk was showing them. A man alone at the far end of the counter, heavy-set, mid-40s, wearing a sport coat that didn't fit across the shoulders. The security guard near the front. The woman in the cream blazer. 2 other clerks, both young women, and 1 more person. She was standing at the main counter near the center of the store, and she was the kind of woman who made a room arrange itself around her without seeming to notice or care. Not because of how she looked, though she was striking, dark hair pulled back in a way that suggested she'd done it in about 90 seconds that morning without a mirror, sharp features, maybe 30. She wore a charcoal blazer over a white shirt, no jewelry, which Logan found faintly ironic given the location. What made the room arrange itself around her was the way she carried herself. Back straight, weight balanced. The particular stillness of someone whose mind was going faster than anyone around her could see. She was looking at a watch in a display case, and she was on the phone, and she was not particularly interested in the watch. Logan got the sense she was killing time, waiting for something or someone, using the store as a comfortable place to stand while she finished a call. He looked away. Sophie had found the birthstone bracelets and was now doing the thing where she pretended to be casually interested in everything except the thing she actually wanted. "The pink one's pretty," Logan said. "It's okay." "It's your birthstone." "I know what my birthstone is, Dad." "Just saying." She pressed her lips together and looked at the bracelet with enormous studied indifference. He almost smiled. That was when the front door opened. 3 men. Logan knew before they were fully through the door. There was a half second, less than that, maybe the length of a breath, where his body registered what his conscious mind was still catching up to. The way they moved, the way the first one scanned the room, not the way a customer scans for what he wants, but the way a man scans for what might go wrong. The 2 deliberate spacing between them. The fact that the second man's right hand was tucked inside his jacket. "Sophie," Logan said quietly. He said it in a voice he hadn't used in years, flat and low and carrying exactly nothing, and she heard it because she stopped pretending about the bracelet and looked at him. "Stay behind me," he said. "No matter what. You don't move unless I tell you." He watched her face change, watched the 7-year-old register that her father was not messing around, and felt something cold slide through his stomach. Not fear. Something older than fear. Something that had kept him alive in places that would have killed a less careful man. The first one through the door pulled out a gun. "Nobody move," he shouted, and his voice cracked on the second word, which told Logan two things. He was scared, and scared men with guns were the worst possible kind. Everything happened fast. The security guard near the door fumbled for his weapon. An amateur mistake, too slow, wrong angle. And the second man hit him across the side of the head with something hard before the guard could clear his holster. The guard went down sideways, clipping a display stand on the way, jewelry scattering across the marble floor. The woman in the cream blazer screamed and backed against the wall behind the counter. The couple near the rings dropped immediately, the woman pulling her husband down with both hands. The heavy-set man in the ill-fitting sport coat bolted for the staff door. He didn't make it. The third man caught him in 4 steps, grabbed him by the collar, and shoved him down to the floor with enough force that he skidded. "I said nobody moves," the first man screamed again, louder this time, and Logan could hear the pitch of it. Too high, too tight. Logan had eased backward during those 3 seconds, putting himself between Sophie and the nearest gunman, his back pressing her toward the display case behind them. She had not made a sound. He had trained her for exactly nothing, and somehow she understood anyway. "Down," he murmured. "Knees, then sit. Right here. Don't move, Soph." She went down without a word. He stayed standing. The first man, the one who'd spoken, the one Logan had already identified as the leader, or the closest thing to one this operation had, was moving toward the central counter. He had the gun up, a compact 9mm, held the way people hold guns when they learned from watching television instead of from someone who knew what they were doing. Wrist bent slightly, grip too tight. He was sweating through his shirt. "Phones on the floor," he said. "Wallets, jewelry, everything. You." He pointed the gun at the woman in the charcoal blazer, the woman Logan had noticed earlier, the one with the phone. "You. Here." She had already put the phone in her pocket. She didn't move right away, and Logan saw that register on the gunman's face, saw the irritation flare, and thought, "Move, lady. Don't make him prove something." She stepped away from the counter and moved toward the center of the room, calm. Logan watched her hands. They were steady. She looked at the gun with the concentrated expression of someone solving a problem they hadn't expected to encounter that morning, and he caught himself revising his first read on her. She wasn't frozen. She was thinking. "I'm going to need your bag," the gunman said. "I don't have a bag." He stepped closer. "Your phone, then. Give me your phone." "All right." She reached slowly into her blazer pocket, drew out the phone, and held it out. That was when the second man, the one who'd taken down the security guard, who was now moving along the counter toward the back, knocked over a display stand. It wasn't intentional. He'd misjudged the distance. The stand hit the floor with a crash of glass and metal, and the first gunman spun toward the sound, arms swinging. The gun tracked across the room and centered on Sophie. It lasted less than a second. He'd flinched at the noise, and his arm had swung by reflex, and he hadn't registered what he was pointing at yet. His hand was shaking. His finger was inside the trigger guard. Logan was already moving. He crossed the 6 feet between them in 2 steps, and he was not thinking. The thinking had turned off. Something older had turned on, something that ran on its own current and knew exactly what it was doing and did not need to confer with anything else. His left hand shot out and redirected the weapon, not grabbing it, not wrestling for it, but a precise outward deflection at the wrist that moved the barrel's line past him even as the gun went off, the crack of it deafeningly loud in the enclosed space. The shot punched through the display case behind him. Glass exploded. His right elbow came up and across into the gunman's jaw. The man dropped. Logan caught the gun on the way down. The whole sequence had taken less than 3 seconds. The second man spun from the counter, weapon rising. Logan put the display case between himself and the angle of fire, moving laterally, and said in a voice that carried completely, "I have your partner's gun. You shoot at me. I shoot back. Look at how I'm standing, and make a good decision." The second man looked at how he was standing. The silence in the store lasted about 4 seconds. "Put it down," Logan said. Not loud, not angry. The particular flatness of a man who is telling you something true. The second man, who was 30 years old and had gotten into this because his brother had owed money to the wrong people, and it had seemed like there was no other way out, looked at Logan Barrett in his concrete-stained work boots and his soft gray Henley, and he put the gun on the floor. The third man near the staff door didn't need to be asked. He had his hands up before Logan turned around. Sirens. Somewhere in the distance. Logan stood there for a moment. The adrenaline was already flattening out, the way it always had, leaving behind a particular hollow feeling that he'd never found a good word for. Not regret, not relief. Something in between that tasted like metal. He looked at the woman in the charcoal blazer. She was staring at him. For the first time since he'd walked into the store, she looked like she'd been genuinely surprised by something. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She blinked. "No." "Okay." He looked away from her over his shoulder. "Sophie." "I'm here, Dad." Her voice was smaller than usual, but steady. She was still sitting against the base of the display case where he told her to stay, her knees pulled to her chest, both hands pressed flat on the floor. There was broken glass to her left, and she'd moved away from it with enough sense to go right, instead of standing up. He exhaled. "It's over," he said. "Come here." She was across the room and against his side in 4 steps, and he put his arm around her without thinking about the gun still in his other hand or the men on the floor or the sirens pulling closer. She pressed her face against his ribs. "You okay?" he said. "Yeah," she said into his shirt. "You did good. You stayed still." "You told me to." "I know. I'm saying you did good." She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "You shot the glass case." He shot the glass case. "The gun went off when I grabbed his arm." "Okay. I know what it sounded like. It was really loud." "It was," he agreed. "Tut." The police arrived in force, 2 squad cars, then 4, then a tactical unit that had clearly been in the area for something else, and redirected. Logan set the weapon on the floor before anyone came through the door and moved to the back wall with Sophie, hands visible. He had done this before. The process of transitioning from the person who'd handled the situation to just another person in the room when authority arrived. He was practiced at it. The first officer through the door was a woman named Reyes, according to her nameplate, and she read the scene fast. The 2 men on the floor, one unconscious, the third with his hands up, the security guard coming around holding the side of his head, the scattered jewelry, the shattered display case. She looked at Logan. "Sir, are you injured?" "No." "The firearm on the floor, that's yours?" "No, it belonged to the first man. I took it when he pointed it at my daughter." Reyes looked at Sophie, then back at Logan. "All right. I need you to stay with me. Can you do that?" "Yeah." He gave her his name. Logan Barrett, age 40, current address, an apartment complex on the east side of Millfield, 3rd floor, Unit 14. Occupation, construction foreman with Hendricks & Sons, been with them 4 years. She wrote it down. Previous military or law enforcement? The half-beat he took before answering was small enough that most people would have missed it. "Navy," he said. "A while back." "How long ago?" "I got out in 2018. She wrote that down too and moved on to the next question, and Logan watched the room. The couple from near the rings were being interviewed in the far corner. The heavy-set man was pressing a cloth to his forehead and talking to another officer in fast, low sentences. The 2 clerks were huddled together near the staff door. The woman in the charcoal blazer was standing with a detective Logan hadn't seen arrive. Older man, silver-haired, carrying himself like someone who'd worked in rooms like this for 30 years. She was talking to him calmly and clearly, and even from across the room Logan could see her processing things in real time. Not just answering questions, but curating information the way someone did when they were thinking 3 steps ahead. She glanced over at him once. He looked away. Sophie was sitting beside him on a bench near the wall, drawing on the back of a receipt she'd found in his jacket pocket. She did this. Carried herself through situations by going somewhere inside her head and making things on whatever surface was available. Logan had found drawings on napkins, on the back of hardware store receipts, on a paper bag once. She drew what she saw, but with adjustments. The store in her drawing had a cat in it. The cat was wearing a small hat. "You're drawing a cat," he said. "His name is Mr. Biscuit. He wasn't in the store." "I know. I'm improving it." He sat with that for a second. "Fair enough." They were held for over 2 hours. Standard procedure. Logan understood it and didn't fight it. He gave his statement twice, once to Reyes and once to a detective named Callahan, who had a coffee stain on his tie and asked sharper questions than his appearance suggested he would. Logan answered carefully and accurately, and when Callahan asked again about his military background and Logan said again that he'd been Navy and offered nothing more, Callahan wrote something down and moved to another topic. Sophie ate a granola bar that Reyes had produced from somewhere and finished her drawing. When Logan looked at the finished version, the cat was sitting in the center of the store, and there were small figures around it. One tall one, no features, just a tall shape with a gray shirt. One small one, hair tucked behind one ear. He didn't say anything about it. He was signing his witness form when a man in a dark suit appeared at the detective's shoulder and handed him a card. The detective read it, said something Logan couldn't hear, and pointed in the direction of the woman in the charcoal blazer. The suited man nodded and went to her instead. 5 minutes later, she was gone. The apartment on the east side of Millfield was exactly what it needed to be, and nothing more. Logan had rented it for that reason. Not because he liked it, not because it had good light or a nice view, but because it was the kind of place that demanded no attention from the world. 3 floors, exterior staircase, a parking lot with enough cars that one more or one less never stood out. The apartment had 2 bedrooms and a kitchen that faced a wall, and the living room window looked out over the parking lot, which suited him fine. Sophie's room he'd made decent. He'd built her a bookshelf from pine and painted it white, and she'd filled it fast. She had a lot of books for a 7-year-old. She read the way some kids watched screens completely and for long stretches, and he'd never discouraged it even when the books were things she probably understood only partially. She figured it out. She always figured things out. His own room had a bed, a dresser, and a framed photograph of Dana on the nightstand. That was it. He made grilled cheese for dinner because it was Sophie's reliable favorite and because he needed the mundanity of it. The butter in the pan, the weight of the spatula, the particular domestic smallness of the thing. He'd stood in the kitchen of his apartment and needed to make something with his hands that wasn't a weapon. Sophie sat at the kitchen table and watched him cook. "Are you okay?" she asked. He flipped the sandwich. "Yeah." "You're being quiet." "I'm always quiet." "You're being more quiet than regular quiet." He put the sandwich on a plate and cut it diagonally the way she liked. Set it in front of her. Then he put his hands on the counter and stood there for a second. "It's been a long day," he said. She looked at the sandwich, then at him. "Did you know how to do that, what you did?" He didn't pretend not to understand the question. "I used to," he said, "a long time ago." "Did you do it a lot?" "A long time ago?" "Yes." She considered this. "Why did you stop?" He was quiet for a moment. Outside, a car backed out of a parking space, headlights moving across the kitchen wall. "Because you came along," he said, "and I wanted to be just your dad." She picked up half her sandwich and took a bite, chewed. "You can be both," she said, like it was simple, like she'd just solved something he'd spent 6 years turning over. He looked at her. "Eat your dinner, Soph," he said. She ate. Quiet. He called his foreman after she went to sleep. It was past 10, but Russ Hendricks kept weird hours and answered on the second ring. "You're on the news," Russ said, before Logan could open with anything. Logan closed his eyes. "How bad?" "They don't have your name yet. They've got an unidentified man with your physical description who disarmed 3 armed robbers at Cartier on 5th. The security footage shows you pretty clearly from the waist up." Russ paused. "Son, you look like you were having a conversation. You didn't even look nervous." "I was nervous." "You absolutely did not look nervous. You looked like you were helping someone parallel park." "Russ?" "Yeah, you're going to get calls. The news people are going to find you by morning if somebody who recognizes the footage decides to be helpful." Logan pressed the heel of his hand against the bridge of his nose. "I need you to not say anything." "I know the drill, Logan. I'm just saying you might want to think about what you do next, because there's no putting this back in the box." After he hung up, he stood in the kitchen for a while in the dark. The refrigerator hummed. The parking lot was quiet outside the window. He had worked very hard at the box. 4 years in Millfield, before that 2 years in a place called Harmon Creek, that he'd left when Sophie's teacher had started asking too many questions about him at the school fundraiser. Before that, other places. He'd built a life that was specifically and deliberately unremarkable. He paid cash when he could. He had no social media presence. He had one close friend, a man named Torres, who'd served with him and was now running a hardware store in Phoenix, and they talked on the phone twice a month, and neither of them ever used the other's full name. He had been doing so well. He filled a glass of water and drank it standing over the sink. Then he went to check on Sophie. She was asleep with one arm hanging off the side of the bed, and her hair spread out across the pillow, and her mouth was slightly open the way it always was when she was deep under. She had drawn something on the corner of her homework sheet. He could see from the doorway. A small figure with a gray shirt, arms out, in the middle of what appeared to be several smaller figures that were scattering. She'd drawn what she'd seen. He pulled the door almost shut and went to the living room window and looked out at the parking lot for a long time. The call came the next morning at 7:40 while he was making coffee. Unknown number. He let it go to voicemail. The message was short. Mr. Barrett, my name is Marcus Webb. I represent Claire Donovan of Donovan Group. Ms. Donovan would like to arrange a meeting at your earliest convenience to express her gratitude personally. Please call at your earliest convenience. A number. The call ended. He set the phone down and poured the coffee. Sophie came out of her room in her pajamas, with her hair in all directions and her eyes still half closed, and asked if there was orange juice. There's juice, he said. OJ specifically? It's apple. She accepted this with the gravity of someone accepting difficult news and climbed up onto the kitchen stool. He poured her a glass. I have to go to school, she said. I know. There's time. Miss Ambrose is doing the science fair projects today, and I left mine on the table last night. He looked at the table. There was in fact a diorama constructed from a shoebox, several cotton balls, and a piece of cardboard painted dark blue. It was meant to represent the water cycle. The cotton balls were clouds. It looks good, he said. The clouds fell off in the night. I have to re-glue them. After breakfast. What if the glue doesn't dry in time? I'll blow dry it. She stopped with her juice glass halfway to her mouth. That works? Yes. She considered this new information and seemed to find it genuinely useful. Okay, she said. He drank his coffee and thought about Marcus Webb. He didn't call back that day. He did his job, a residential development on the north edge of town, a foundation pour that had to be right before the weather changed, 3 workers who needed managing, and a set of specs that the architect had sent in with 2 errors that Logan had caught before they cost anyone anything. He worked hard, and he thought while he worked the way he always did, the physical rhythm of the thing running underneath whatever was actually going on in his head. Callahan called at noon. A few follow-up questions if you've got a minute. Go ahead. The way you handled that situation yesterday, that wasn't basic military training. I was in for 10 years, Logan said. What unit? I was in the Navy, detective. SEAL? Logan was quiet for one beat. I was in for 10 years, he repeated. Callahan let the pause sit for a second. The 2 guys in the hospital are talking. They're saying they didn't understand what happened. One of them said it felt like the room moved and then he was on the floor. I redirected the weapon and used an elbow strike, Logan said. It's not complicated. For most people, it's extremely complicated. Callahan's voice carried no particular judgment. I'm going to ask you something straight, Mr. Barrett, and I'd appreciate a straight answer. Is there any reason we should be concerned about your security, you or your daughters? Logan stopped walking. He was standing on the edge of a concrete form and the sun was in his eyes and the question had landed somewhere between his shoulder blades. Why are you asking me that? Because the men involved in yesterday's robbery are not operating independently. We've got a third party we're looking at. When something like this happens in a city like this, and the people involved have the kind of connections these 3 have, we like to make sure the witnesses are thinking about their security. I'm thinking about it, Logan said. Good. You have my number. He stood there after the call ended. Across the construction site, one of his workers, a kid named Danny, 23, good instincts, hadn't developed the bad habits yet, was gesturing at a form wall with a question in his face. Logan raised a hand to signal he was coming and started walking and kept his face neutral because he was on a job site and there were people watching. He thought, someone sent 3 men into that store for a reason. He thought, the woman in the charcoal blazer. He thought, she wasn't there to buy anything. He called Webb back that evening from the parking lot of the apartment complex, Sophie upstairs doing homework. The call was answered on the first ring. Mr. Barrett, thank you for returning my call. Who exactly is Claire Donovan? He knew. He'd looked her up at lunch on his phone, sitting in his truck. He wanted to hear how Webb described her. Ms. Donovan is the CEO of Donovan Group. We're a privately held investment and development firm with a focus on... I read the website, Logan said. I'm asking who she is. A brief pause. She's someone who was in a dangerous situation yesterday and would like to thank the man who made sure she walked out of it. Tell her she's welcome and I hope she has a better week. She'd like to do it in person. I understand. Tell her anyway. Mr. Barrett. Webb's voice shifted, professional to something slightly more direct. She's going to find you regardless. She has the means to do it, and she doesn't generally take no for an answer. I'm suggesting a phone call first might go better than whatever comes after. Logan looked at the parking lot. A neighbor was walking a dog at the far end, a woman he'd exchanged 3 words with in 4 years, which was exactly how he'd preferred it. Tell her Thursday, he said. Lunch, public place. Nothing fancy. I'll pass that along. I'll pick the place. Of course. He hung up and sat in the car for a moment. Then he went upstairs and helped Sophie with the last 2 math problems on her homework sheet, and they ate leftover soup for dinner, and he read to her for 20 minutes before she fell asleep. She was still in the phase where she let him do this, and he understood that the window was limited and tried not to think about it too hard. After, he sat in the dark in the living room and thought about boxes. Some boxes, once opened, could not be shut. He had always known this. He had spent years making choices specifically designed to prove it wasn't true. Now he sat in the apartment he'd chosen for its invisibility, in the city he'd moved to for its anonymity, in the life he'd constructed piece by piece from what had been left over after everything he'd lost. And he understood that yesterday's 30 seconds had done something he hadn't been able to undo since it happened. The footage existed. The call from Callahan existed. Marcus Webb existed. The men in the hospital who were talking to someone about something existed. Logan had been quiet for years. The world had found him anyway. He went to the window and looked out at the parking lot for a long time. The night was clear, and the sodium lights gave everything that particular amber tone that meant nothing was wrong and something might be anyway. A car he didn't recognize was parked 2 spaces from his truck. It had been there when he came home. It was still there. It might mean nothing. He stood at the window until 1 in the morning, watching it. It drove away at 1:15. He went to bed. He did not sleep for a long time. Thursday came. He chose a diner called Marcy's on the corner of Ash and 11th, a place he knew, a place with 4 exits counting the kitchen, a place where the tables were separated enough that a conversation couldn't be overheard, and a place where a woman in an expensive blazer would be mildly out of context, but not impossible. He arrived 12 minutes early and took the corner booth facing the door and ordered coffee and told the server he was waiting for someone. He was looking at the menu when she came in. She wasn't hard to spot. She dressed down. Dark jeans, a simple black top, no blazer this time. But there was still that quality about her, that particular frequency she operated on. She scanned the room the way Logan scanned rooms, which he noticed immediately. She found him in 3 seconds, which told him she'd been given a description. She crossed to the booth and sat down across from him. "Mr. Barrett," she said. "Ms. Donovan," he said. Up close she looked tired in a specific way. Not the tired of bad sleep, but the tired of someone who carried things. There was a sharpness to her that hadn't dulled, but underneath it, he caught something that he recognized because he knew what it felt like from the inside. The particular strain of someone holding more than they were letting show. "I wanted to say thank you," she said, without preamble. "What you did was, I understand what would have happened if you hadn't moved when you did." "The gun wasn't pointed at you," he said. She paused. It was pointed at your daughter. I know. Then you did it for her. I did it because it needed doing, he said, which was the truest thing he could say, and also the thing that was hardest to explain to someone who didn't understand how that kind of decision worked. There was no hierarchy to it. The gun was a threat. The threat had to be removed. Sophie was the immediate danger point, but his body had registered the whole room as the problem. Claire Donovan looked at him for a moment. Most people don't move, she said, when a gun is involved. Most people freeze or they run, and they hate themselves for it later, and I understand why they do it, and I probably would have done the same thing and you didn't. I've been in situations where freezing wasn't an option, he said. The Navy. He looked at her steadily. Webb did some research. I did some research, she said without apology. Though, I'll be honest, there wasn't much to find, which is interesting. He said nothing. The server came with her coffee and they both went quiet for the few seconds that required. When the server left, Claire wrapped both hands around the mug and looked at him with the direct, assessing quality of someone who was usually the most competent person in any room she was in and knew it and was trying to decide whether that was true here. You're not going to make this easy, she said. I'm not trying to make it anything, Logan said. You wanted to say thank you. You said it. I appreciate it. I also wanted to offer you something. You don't need to. I know I don't need to. There was a faint edge to it. Not anger, just the clarification of someone who was precise about the difference between what she needed and what she chose. I have a project, a large-scale construction coordination role. The man running it stepped down unexpectedly last week, and I need someone with real experience in both structural work and team management, not someone with a good resume and soft hands. She paused. I looked at your work history. The Meridian development last spring had structural problems in the original design that you caught and rerouted without stalling the project by a single day. That's not luck. Logan studied her. You're offering me a job. I'm describing one. Whether that becomes an offer depends on whether you're interested in the description. Why would a billion-dollar company hire a construction foreman they met during a robbery? She didn't flinch at the directness. Because the construction foreman disarmed 3 people in under 4 seconds and has a record that someone went to a lot of trouble to make unreadable. She held his gaze. I'm thorough, Mr. Barrett. Whatever you were before the framing construction company, I don't know what it is, and I'm not asking, but I'm also not pretending I didn't notice. He drank his coffee. Outside, a delivery truck blocked the intersection briefly, and he watched it without appearing to watch it. I have a daughter, he said. I know. She's 7. Her name's Sophie, and she's got school and a routine and friends she's made, and I have spent a significant amount of time making sure her life is stable. Any significant change to my situation affects hers. Claire nodded once. I understand that. I don't think you do, not fully. He said it without heat. I'm not being unkind. I'm saying I've built something careful, and any cracks in it matter more than they'd matter to most people. So when someone offers me something that looks like an opportunity, I have to weigh it against what I might be breaking. She was quiet for a second. What are you afraid of? She asked. He looked at her. Not in general, she said. Specifically, right now. He considered not answering. Then he said, that someone found me. Claire's expression shifted. Not surprise, exactly. More like the confirmation of something she'd already been turning over. Callahan, she said quietly. What do you know about the robbery? He asked. I know it wasn't random, she said. I've known since Tuesday morning. The men who came through that door were hired. Whoever hired them knew I was going to be in that store at that specific time. My schedule is not public. She looked at him steadily. Someone inside my organization or connected to it passed that information to someone who wanted to use it. That's a different situation than a jewelry store robbery. Yes, she said. It is. It means you were the target. It means I was the reason, she said. Whether I was the target or whether I was meant to be used as leverage for something else, I don't know yet. Logan put his coffee down. He looked at her across the table in Marcy's diner on the corner of Ash and 11th in the amber light of an ordinary Thursday morning, and he understood that this conversation had not been about gratitude for the last several minutes. You came here for more than a thank you, he said. She met his eyes. I came because you're the only person who was in that room who didn't freeze, and because I can't find out who you are, and because those two things together mean something that I haven't figured out yet." She paused. "I'm not trying to use you, Mr. Barrett. I'm trying to be honest because I think you'd see through anything else." He sat with that. Outside, the delivery truck had cleared the intersection. The street moved normally. Sophie would be at school right now, in the middle of the science fair, cotton ball clouds glued back in place with a careful hand and a blow dryer, presenting the water cycle to Miss Ambrose with the particular intensity she brought to things she cared about. Logan picked up his coffee. "Tell me more about the project," he said. Claire Donovan leaned forward slightly, and somewhere in the set of her expression, he caught something that wasn't relief exactly, but adjacent to it. The subtle release of a person who has been holding their breath and did not know how much until they stopped. "It's in the eastern sector of the city," she said. "Mixed-use development, 12 floors. We broke ground in March, but the structural coordination has been—" "Who's your current site supervisor?" "Man named Paletti. He knows the groundwork, but he can't read the framing specs fast enough to catch problems before they compound." "What's the timeline?" "We're 14 days behind on Phase 2. I want to recover 10 of them." "That's ambitious." "Most things worth doing are." He almost said something. Instead, he flagged down the server and ordered a refill, and Claire Donovan across the table tucked one foot under herself on the diner seat, the first unconsciously comfortable thing she'd done since she sat down, and pulled out her phone to show him the project files. He leaned in to look. The coffee came. Outside, the morning moved on. He took the job. He told himself it was practical. The Donovan Group project paid nearly double what Hendricks was giving him, and Sophie's school had a tuition gap coming up in the fall that he'd been quietly stressing about since February. He told himself it was the right move for the right reasons, and he half believed it, and the half he didn't believe he left alone. What he didn't tell himself, what he refused to examine too closely in those first few days, was that something in the conversation with Claire Donovan had shifted something in him. Not romantically, not yet, not even close to that. It was more specific than that and harder to name. It was the way she'd looked at him across that diner table and said, "I think you'd see through anything else." Not as flattery, not as manipulation, but as a plain statement of calibration. She had assessed him and adjusted accordingly, and he hadn't been assessed honestly in a long time. Most people looked at Logan Barrett and saw what he'd built for them to see. A quiet, competent man with a hard past he didn't discuss, steady at his work, good with his kid, not worth a second look. Claire had looked at exactly the same surface and seen the seams. He put in his 2 weeks with Russ Hendricks, who took it without drama, and told him the Donovan Group had a reputation for eating people and spitting them out restructured. "I'll keep that in mind," Logan said. "You probably won't," Russ said, and shook his hand. But the site on the eastern edge of the city was a 12-floor mixed-use development called the Meridian East Project, which Logan thought was an unimaginative name for a building that had decent bones underneath its coordination problems. He walked it on his first day with the site supervisor, a man named Paletti, who was 53 and had the build of someone who'd done physical work for 20 years before moving into management and hadn't fully reconciled himself to the desk that came with the title. He showed Logan around with the slightly defensive energy of a man waiting to be criticized. Logan didn't criticize, he asked questions. He walked the framing on the 3rd floor and spent 40 minutes with the structural specs in the site trailer and identified 2 sequencing errors that were going to cost time in Phase 3 if they weren't addressed now. "Those were flagged before," Paletti said. "Were they fixed?" "We were waiting on sign-off from the architect." "How long have you been waiting?" Paletti looked at a date on the sheet. 11 days. "I'll get the sign-off today," Logan said. Paletti studied him for a moment, recalibrating. "Webb said you were coming in above me on the org chart." "I'm not above you. I'm coordinating across the phases. You know this site better than I do, and I need that." Logan held his gaze. "I'm not here to tell you how to run your crew. I'm here so the left hand knows what the right hand is doing." The defensive edge didn't fully leave Paletti, but it softened by a degree or two. "All right," he said. Logan got the architect's sign-off by 3 in the afternoon. The architect, a nervous man named Gerard, had been sitting on the approval because he was worried about a liability question that turned out to be answerable in 20 minutes of direct conversation. Logan had the conversation, got the approval in writing, and sent it to Paletti before the end of the workday. Paletti texted back a single word: fast. Logan put the phone away and drove home to make dinner and help Sophie with homework, and the workday folded back into the thing it was supposed to be, a component of a life, not the life itself. He saw Claire twice in the first week and a half. Once on site, where she walked through with Webb and two investors and asked Logan precise, intelligent questions about the phase timeline that he answered precisely and she seemed satisfied with. The second time was in the building's main office, where he was dropping off revised specs and she was coming out of a meeting looking like she'd been in 3 rooms simultaneously for 6 hours. "How's Paletti?" she asked, stopping in the hall. "Good. He knows what he's doing. He was resistant when I first brought him on." "He came around," Logan said. "He just needed to know he wasn't being replaced." She looked at him with that direct, measuring quality. "Are you good at that? Making people feel not replaced?" "I'm good at reading what people actually need versus what they say they need," he said. "It's not the same skill as being reassuring." "No," she said. "It's better." She shifted the folder she was carrying. "Sophie, okay after last week?" He appreciated that she'd caught herself. Not after the robbery, not after the incident, just after last week, like it was a thing that happened and had been processed and put somewhere. "She's okay," he said. She drew a picture of it. That's one way to process things. She put a cat in the store that wasn't there, named Mr. Biscuit. Something happened to Claire's expression. Not quite a smile, more like the precursor to one, the moment just before the actual thing arrived. "That's healthy, I think, revising the narrative." "She improves everything she draws," Logan said. "I've never seen her draw something and leave it as is." Claire looked at him for a second longer than the conversation required. Then Webb appeared at the end of the hall and said her name with the tone of someone whose patience with a waiting room had limits, and she moved toward him. "Thursday," she said over her shoulder. "Site walk, 8 a.m. Bring the Phase 3 specs." "They'll be ready," he said. The call that changed the week came on a Wednesday. It was 2:47 in the afternoon and Logan was on the 3rd floor of the Meridian East site reviewing the steel reinforcement schedule with a subcontractor when his phone buzzed with a number he didn't recognize. He let it go. It buzzed again 30 seconds later with the same number. He stepped away from the subcontractor and answered. "Mr. Barrett." A woman's voice. Tight. Not panicked, but close. "This is Patricia Ambrose. I'm Sophie's teacher at—" "I know who you are," he said. "What happened?" It wasn't a question, and she registered that. "There was an incident outside the school at pickup time. A man approached Sophie in the front yard while she was waiting with the other students. One of our aides intervened and the man left, but she's a little shaken, and I thought you should come." Logan was already walking toward the site stairs. "Is she hurt?" "No, she's physically fine. She's inside with me. I'm 12 minutes away. Take your time, she's at 12 minutes, he said, and hung up. He made it in 9. So, Sophie was sitting in a chair in Miss Ambrose's classroom with a juice box she hadn't opened, her hands in her lap. She looked up when Logan came through the door, and something in her face shifted. The particular relief of a child who has been holding themselves together and can now, because a parent has arrived, afford to let go a little. He crouched in front of her. "Hey." "Hi, Dad." "You okay?" "Yeah." She didn't look it completely, but she was trying. "He didn't touch me. He was talking to me." "What did he say?" She looked at her juice box. "He said he knew you. He said you guys worked together a long time ago. He said he had a message." Logan kept his voice even. "Did he say his name?" "No. He said the message was, the quiet man should stay quiet." The classroom was very still. Miss Ambrose, standing near the window with both hands pressed together in front of her, was watching Logan's face with the careful attention of someone who expected it to tell her something about how afraid she should be. He did not let it tell her that. "Okay," he said to Sophie. "Let's go." "What does that mean?" Sophie asked. "What he said." "It means someone is trying to scare me," Logan said, "which means they don't know me well." She picked up her juice box and finally put the straw in. "Are we moving again?" He looked at her. The flatness of it, The resignation in those 4 words, the fact that she asked it without drama because she'd had to ask it before, that landed somewhere in his chest and sat there. "Not today," he said. "Let's get home." He called Torres from the car while Sophie sat in the back seat reading, headphones on, deliberately giving him privacy the way she did when she understood a conversation wasn't for her ears. "Someone made contact with my daughter," Logan said when Torres picked up. "At school, a man said he knew me from before." Torres was quiet for 2 seconds. "Description?" "I don't have one yet. White male, I assume, based on the school. I'll get it." He kept his eyes on the traffic. "Someone is pulling on threads, Marcus. Whoever ran that operation at the jewelry store, I think it wasn't random, and I think the connection to me is not accidental." "You think they used the robbery to find you? Or the robbery surfaced me and now someone is responding to that? Either way, I'm visible." Torres's voice was careful and precise, the way it got when he was thinking fast. "I'm going to make some calls. I still have 2 people in the community who owe me real favors, not the fake kind. Can you give me 48 hours? I can give you 24. Reasonable. In the meantime, you know the protocol." "I know the protocol." He didn't say I have a 7-year-old who asked me if we're moving again. He didn't say the protocol is the thing I've been trying not to need for 4 years. He said, "I'll be careful." "Logan?" Torres paused. "The jewelry store footage. It's been circulating." "I know. Widely." "I know that too. If someone was already looking for you, that footage is a flag on a map." "I understand." After the call, he drove the rest of the way home in silence. Sophie had fallen asleep in the back seat, which she never did, and he understood that the day had cost her something she hadn't shown him. He carried her up the stairs to the apartment with her head against his shoulder, her backpack over his other arm, and she half woke in the elevator and murmured something he didn't catch. "I've got you," he said. She went back to sleep. He called Claire that night. He was not sure, until she picked up, whether he'd made the right decision. He'd gone back and forth on it for 2 hours after Sophie was in bed, back and forth between "this is her problem" and "I walked into it and she needs to know," and telling her pulls you deeper into something that has already put your daughter on a stranger's radar. In the end, the second argument lost, because he was already deep. The depth was not the question. The question was whether he was going to navigate it with information or without it. "Mr. Barrett," she said, picking up on the 3rd ring. She sounded like she'd been awake for some time, not groggy, working. "Someone approached my daughter at school today," he said. "Outside at pickup. A man. He said he had a message for me." The silence on the line lasted about 3 seconds. "What was the message?" He told her. Another silence, longer. He could hear her thinking, which was not a thing most people's silences conveyed, but hers did. "You think it's connected to what happened at the store," she said. "I think it's connected to you," Logan said. "Specifically, I think whoever has a problem with you ran that robbery as an operation, and the footage of me handling it surfaced my identity to someone who already had a file with my name on it." He paused. "That's a significant coincidence stack, Ms. Donovan." "I don't believe in significant coincidence stacks." "Neither do I." Her voice was quiet and had something in it he hadn't heard before. Not guilt, but the adjacent thing, the awareness that a decision she made had produced consequences for someone outside herself. "Your daughter wasn't hurt?" "No." I'm sorry, Mr. Barrett. I want to be clear that whatever resource I have available to address this, it's available. I have a private security team. Tell me about your private security team," he said, which was a different kind of conversation than she'd intended, and she understood that. "Garrison Security. I've been with them for 3 years. Head of detail is a man named Farrow, former Secret Service." "How many people currently have access to your schedule?" 7, maybe 8 with the new infrastructure hire. She paused. "You think it's someone inside?" "You already thought that. You said so at the diner." "I said someone passed information about my location. I said that on Tuesday. By Wednesday, someone went to your daughter's school. That's fast, Mr. Barrett." "Yes," he said. "It is." "That means whoever this is, that they're not just opportunistic. They had resources ready to move." He was standing at the kitchen window again, looking at the parking lot, which had become a habit that he didn't love but couldn't seem to stop. The unfamiliar car had not returned. There was a sedan near the streetlight that he'd checked twice since getting home, and it belonged to the neighbor in Unit 22. He was nearly sure, but nearly was a margin he no longer felt comfortable operating in. "I need access to your file on the robbery," he said. "Whatever you've been building since Tuesday. Who you think it is, what the connection might be, anything that points to why you specifically were targeted." She didn't hesitate. "I'll have Webb send it tonight. Send it to a different address than the one on my work profile." He gave her a personal email he used for nothing else. "Okay." She paused. "You're not going to run." It wasn't quite a question. He thought about Sophie asking, "Are we moving again?" with that flat, practiced resignation. "I'm not going to run," he said, "because of Sophie." "Partly," he said, "partly because I'm tired of running." The line was quiet for a moment. Then Claire said, "I haven't been fully honest with you." He waited. "The watch I was looking at in the store wasn't a watch I was considering buying. I was meeting someone, a man named Kellner. He's a mid-level executive at a firm that has been trying to acquire one of my subsidiaries. He reached out through an intermediary and asked to meet somewhere unofficial, said he had information about internal problems in my organization that I needed to hear. I agreed to the meeting." She paused. "He never showed. Instead, 3 men came through the door with guns." Logan absorbed this. "Kellner set you up. Or Kellner was used. I don't know which." Her voice was careful and steady, but he could hear what was underneath it. The particular strain of someone who had discovered that a problem they thought was manageable was considerably larger than they'd priced it. "I've been trying to find out which one it is since Tuesday. If Kellner was used, then there's someone above him I haven't identified yet. If Kellner was the source, then it's internal," Logan said, "and someone you trust handed you to him." "Yes." He turned away from the window. "You need to reduce your inner circle. Tonight, not next week." "I know. Down to 3. You, Webb, and whoever in your security operation you're completely certain of." "Pharaoh," she said without hesitation. 3 people until we know more." She was quiet for a second. "Are you going to help me with this?" she asked, and there was something careful in how she said it. Not pleading, not maneuvering, just asking a plain question and leaving the answer entirely to him. He thought about the construction project, about Paletti and the Phase 3 specs and the 14 days of lost schedule. He thought about Sophie's juice box, untouched in her lap, and the small resignation in those 4 words. "Are we moving again?" "Send me the file," he said. "I'll look at it tonight. It'll be in your inbox in 10 minutes. He glanced toward the hallway, where Sophie's door was closed and the light under it was dark. She was asleep. She was safe for now, in this apartment that she knew, in the city where she'd made friends and was doing the science fair and had a teacher named Miss Ambrose who called him when something was wrong. "Mr. Barrett," Claire said. "Logan," he said. If we're going to do this, you should call me Logan." A brief pause. "All right. Logan." He heard something shift in how she said the next part. "My security team is good, but I've been watching you think for 2 weeks, and you're not a construction foreman who used to be in the Navy. Whatever you actually were, I don't need the details. I just want you to know that I know the difference." "The file," he said. 10 minutes. 10 minutes, she said, and hung up. He pulled a chair to the kitchen table and opened his laptop and waited. Outside, the parking lot was quiet. The sedan near the streetlight hadn't moved. The email arrived in 8 minutes. He opened it and began to read, and the names in it were not names he recognized, not from his past, but the structure of what was described. The layering, the cutouts, the way information had been selectively moved and then selectively buried. That structure he knew. He'd worked in organizations that functioned this way. He'd been, for a brief and damaging period of his life, on the other side of exactly this kind of architecture. He read until 2 in the morning. The next day, Claire came to the construction site. Not for the scheduled Thursday walk. This was before that, 7:15 a.m., before most of the crew had arrived. She pulled up in a dark car with Pharaoh driving and walked across the site in boots that were slightly wrong for the terrain and met Logan near the site trailer without any preamble. "I found something last night," she said. "So did I," he said. They stood in the early morning light among the steel framing of the third floor's exterior, and the city moved behind them, and Logan had his coffee, and Claire had nothing in her hands, and they talked for 25 minutes about what they'd each found. She'd identified a financial transfer trail connecting Kellner to a holding company that ran back to a man named Royce Draper, a name that meant nothing to Logan on its face, but which Claire said represented a former intelligence contractor who had reinvented himself as a private equity operator with interests in several development markets where Donovan Group was also present. Competing interests, Logan said. Overlapping interests, Claire said, which was a meaningful distinction. He doesn't want me out. He wants me compliant. The robbery wasn't meant to kill me. It was meant to demonstrate capability, to show me that he could reach me wherever I was, and that I should take whatever message followed seriously. What message followed? I received a letter 3 days ago through a blind delivery. No sender. It proposed a quiet merger of two subsidiaries at terms that would have represented a $140 million transfer of value to Draper's holding company, framed as a mutual benefit arrangement. She held his gaze. It was the kind of letter you send after you've made someone understand their vulnerability. Logan was quiet for a moment. And the man who came to Sophie's school, that one I think was a secondary message, she said, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked genuinely uncomfortable, not afraid but troubled, in the way of someone who understood that the collateral their choices had created was real and human and 7 years old. I think Draper ran the robbery, identified you from the footage, discovered who you actually were, and then sent someone to your daughter to tell you to stay out of it. He found my file, Logan said. He found something. What he found told him you were a threat worth neutralizing preemptively. I'm a construction foreman. You're not, she said quietly. The steel framing cast long shadows in the morning light. Somewhere in the city, Sophie was getting dressed for school, eating the toast that Logan had left wrapped for her in foil on the counter with a note that said, "Don't forget science fair debrief. I want to hear everything." Dad. She was probably reading while she ate. Who else knows Draper's name in connection with this? Logan asked. Me? Farrow. And now you. Webb doesn't know. I'm not sure about Webb yet, Claire said, and he heard what it cost her to say that. The particular grief of someone who had trusted a person for years and was now measuring the shape of that trust under new light. Okay, Logan said. Then we keep it to 3. She nodded. There's one more thing. She pulled out her phone and turned it toward him. It was a document, scanned, the original paper clearly old, but the text readable. Farrow has a contact who still has access to certain archives. He pulled this last night. Logan took the phone and read. It took him a moment to understand what he was looking at. Then it took him another moment to understand what it meant. It was a personnel action record, dated 2017. It described a reclassification of a classified operation file, the specific operation Logan had run in his final year of active service, the one that had gone wrong in ways that the official record described as operational failure, but which Logan had always understood as something else. The record showed the reclassification as standard procedure, but at the bottom, in the authorization field, was a name. The name was not a name Logan had expected to see. He handed the phone back to Claire and looked out at the steel framing. How did Farrow's contact get this? He asked. He didn't ask, Claire said. I didn't either. Logan stood with it for a long time. The morning sounds of the site coming to life filtered in from around them. A truck backing up, voices, the distant sound of a saw somewhere. Normal sounds. The sounds of a day beginning that looked from the outside like any other day. The name at the bottom of that document, he said. That's not Draper. No, Claire said. It's not. That's someone much higher. Yes. He looked at her. She looked back at him with the steadiness of someone who had understood since last night that the problem was larger than she'd originally priced it, and had made her peace with that, and was still standing here in boots that were slightly wrong for the terrain at 7:15 in the morning on a construction site, because she had decided that standing here was the right thing to do. Draper isn't running this, Logan said. He's a mechanism. Someone above him found me on that footage and made a phone call, and Draper moved. That's what I think, she said. He pressed his thumb against the scar on his right hand. The table saw scar, the marker of the life he'd built over the top of the one he'd tried to leave behind. I need to make a call, he said. My own contact. Someone I trust. All right? And I need Sophie to have coverage. Real coverage, not visible. The kind where she doesn't know it's there and the school doesn't know it's there. Pharaoh can arrange that today. Today, he confirmed. She held his gaze for a moment. Are you all right? It was a genuine question, and he gave it a genuine moment of consideration, which was more than he usually gave that kind of question. I've been here before, he said. Not this exact version, but the shape of it. He looked at the framing around them. The difference is I had nothing to lose then. I fought like that, like nothing behind me mattered. And now? He looked back at her. Now everything behind me matters, which means I need to be smarter than I was then, not just faster. Claire held his gaze, and in the particular quality of her silence, he caught something he hadn't expected from her. Not pity, not admiration, but something quieter than either. The recognition of someone who understood. At some level she probably hadn't examined what it cost a person to be willing to lose everything for something small and irreplaceable. Then let's be smart, she said. He nodded once and pulled out his phone to call Torres, and the morning moved on around them, and the steel framing of the Meridian East building cast its long shadows across the ground, and the city was full of ordinary people having ordinary days, and neither of them was one of those people anymore. And they both knew it, and neither of them said so. Torres called back at 11 that night. Logan was sitting at the kitchen table with the file Claire had sent and a legal pad where he'd been drawing connection maps the old way. By hand, pen on paper, the way he'd been taught, when the assumption was that anything digital could be read by the wrong person. Sophie had been asleep for 2 hours. The apartment was quiet except for the refrigerator hum and the occasional sound of traffic from the street below. I made my calls, Torres said, without greeting. You're not going to like what I found. Tell me. The operation, the one from 2017, the one that burned, it wasn't just reclassified. The original after-action report was altered, specifically the section on intelligence sourcing. Someone removed 2 pages and replaced them with a sanitized version. The original pages described a source inside the operation who had been feeding target information to a third party before the mission went live. Logan set down his pen. A leak. Before we even went in. Before you went in, the target knew you were coming. The ambush wasn't opportunistic. It was prepared. Torres paused. 3 of your people died in that ambush, Logan. I know how many died. The altered report attributed it to faulty terrain intelligence. That's what went into the official record. That's what your commanders saw. That's what the review board used when they concluded the operation failed due to planning error. Logan was very still. The name on that authorization document that Claire's guy found, he said. I need to know if it connects to the source. That's the part you're not going to like, Torres said. The name on the authorization, Deputy Director Harlan Voss. He was mid-level in 2017, but he had oversight of the program your operation ran under. He's not mid-level anymore. He was confirmed as acting director of the National Clandestine Service 8 months ago. The kitchen felt smaller than it had a minute ago. He's the one who altered the report, Logan said. I can't prove it directly, but the timeline fits and the authorization trail runs through his office at every significant junction. Someone wanted the leak buried and the operation failure attributed to bad planning rather than betrayal, and Voss had both the motive and the access to make that happen. Why now? Logan said. It's been 8 years. Why is he moving now? Because you surfaced, Torres said simply. You were a ghost for 4 years. The footage from the store put you back in the world. And if you're back in the world, you're a liability. A living person who was in that operation and who could, if he started asking questions, eventually find what Pharaoh's contact just found. Logan looked at the legal pad. The connection map on it suddenly had a different center than it had an hour ago. Draper's Voss's cutout, he said. Draper has done contract work for Voss's office going back to 2019. That's not classified. It's buried in procurement records, but it's there if you know what to look for, and someone pulls the thread. Torres's voice was careful and direct. Logan, this is not a corporate dispute. This is a man with significant institutional authority who's already demonstrated he will burn people to protect himself. If he knows you're connected to Claire Donovan and that she's been pulling on the same threads, he knows, Logan said. He has to know. If he had the resources to find me from the footage, he's watching her too. The silence on the line had a particular weight to it. You need to move, Torres said. Not permanently. But you need to get Sophie and Claire somewhere that isn't on any profile connected to either of you, and you need to do it before he decides that a problem is easier to eliminate than to manage. After the call, Logan sat with the legal pad for a long time. Then he got up and went to Sophie's room and stood in the doorway, the way he did when the world got too big and he needed something to measure it against. She was sprawled sideways across her bed, one arm hanging off the edge, mouth open. She'd fallen asleep with a book on her stomach, a library book about deep-sea creatures, which she'd been reading obsessively for 2 weeks because she'd seen something about bioluminescent fish on a school computer and decided she needed to understand everything about it. He stood there for a while. Then he went back to the kitchen and called Claire. Well, she didn't argue about moving. That was the thing about Claire that he was still learning. She did not perform emotion in the direction of a problem. She processed, she assessed, she acted. When he laid out what Torres had told him, she was quiet through most of it, and when he finished, she said, "Where?" "I have a place," he said. "A property that's not connected to me or to you. It belonged to a man I served with who passed it to me in his will. I've never filed the deed transfer in my current name. As far as any record is concerned, it belongs to a deceased veteran named Carver, and there's no chain leading from Carver to me." "How far?" 2.5 hours north. It's a house, and not a safe house. It's a real structure with rooms and a kitchen and a working well. I've maintained it." He paused. "It's not comfortable." "I don't need comfortable." "I know. I'm saying Sophie will need some management on the expectations front. She's met me twice." "I know that too." He wasn't sure what he was trying to say. Something about the particular strangeness of assembling people from different parts of your life into one confined space, because the world had forced the arrangement. "I'll talk to her in the morning." "What time do we move?" "Early, before the school day starts, so there's no absence flag. I'll tell the school she's sick. We leave by 6, separate cars, converging at a waypoint I'll send you." "A pharaoh?" "He drives you, separately from us. If anyone is watching either of us leave, 2 separate cars with a gap between them creates a harder surveillance problem than a convoy." He thought for a moment. "Leave your personal phone at the apartment. Get a prepaid." "I have one already," she said. He almost asked why, and then didn't, because the answer was obvious. She'd been preparing for something like this since the robbery. She was not someone who waited for the next problem to arrive. She had been building contingencies since the moment 3 men walked through a jewelry store door, and she understood that her schedule had been given to someone who wanted to use it against her. 6 a.m., he said. "I'll be ready." "Chain," he told Sophie at 5:30, while she was still half asleep and eating cereal at the kitchen table. "We're going somewhere for a few days," he said. "Out of the city." She looked at him over her spoon. Her hair was tangled and she had a crease from her pillow across her left cheek. "A trip?" "Something like that." She read him the way she'd always read him, with the particular accuracy of a child who had grown up with a parent who chose his words carefully and had learned to hear the space around them. "Is it because of the man at school?" "Partly." "Is Claire coming?" He'd mentioned Claire twice in passing over the past 2 weeks. Once when explaining the new job, once when Sophie had found a business card in his jacket pocket and asked about it with forensic interest. "Yes," he said. "Her and someone who works for her." Sophie considered this while eating her cereal. "Does she know about the house? The one with the well?" He'd taken Sophie to the Carver property once, 2 summers ago, for a long weekend. She'd been 5 and had found the hand pump well to be the most interesting technological innovation she'd ever encountered. She'd pumped it for 40 minutes straight. "She will soon," Logan said. "Does she know about you? Like, the real about you?" He looked at his daughter. "What's the real about me?" "That you used to do dangerous things and you're trying not to anymore." She said it matter-of-factly, the way she said most things. Not cruel, not sad, just accurate. "She has a sense of it," he said. Sophie ate the last of her cereal. "I like her," she said, "from the times I've seen her. She doesn't talk to me like I'm little. You're not little. A lot of adults don't know that." She slid off the stool and took her bowl to the sink. "Okay, I'll pack. Pack for a week. Bring your books." Obviously, she said, and went to her room. The Carver property sat at the end of a dirt road off a county route that didn't appear on standard mapping applications. The house was a one-story structure, solidly built from materials that had aged well. Wood frame, metal roof, deep porch facing west. Behind it, through a stand of pine and birch, a creek ran shallow and clear. The nearest town was 11 miles and had a gas station, a diner, and a post office that was open 3 days a week. They arrived at different times. Logan and Sophie first, 40 minutes before Claire and Pharaoh. He unlocked the house, turned on the water main, got the generator running, and had coffee brewing by the time headlights came up the dirt road. Pharaoh was a compact, watchful man in his mid-40s who took in the property with the systematic visual sweep of someone assessing a perimeter. He shook Logan's hand with a firm grip and minimal words and immediately walked the exterior. Logan appreciated this. Claire stepped out of the car and looked at the house for a moment, then at the tree line, then at the sky, which was still doing the last of sunrise, pink and gray and clean. She looked tired in a real way now, not the managed tired of the diner, but the kind that came from a night of making hard decisions and not sleeping enough afterward. Sophie appeared in the doorway. "There's a well," she announced. Claire looked at her. "A real one?" "Hand pump. You're going to like it." Something crossed Claire's face, the actual smile this time, not the precursor. It changed her completely, briefly, before the situation folded back over the top of it. "I believe you," she said. They spent the first day establishing the basics. Pharaoh took the second perimeter check and identified 2 approach angles that needed monitoring. Logan agreed with his assessment, and they set up a rotation between them for overnight watches without discussing it as a formal arrangement, just 2 people who understood what needed doing and divided it sensibly. Claire set up a secure laptop connection using a protocol her tech team had configured before they left, and spent 3 hours going through financial records with the systematic focus of someone dismantling a building from the foundation up. Sophie read her deep-sea book and drew things and asked Pharaoh at one point whether he had ever been in a submarine, which he had, briefly, and they had a 20-minute conversation about it that seemed to genuinely interest them both. Logan cooked. He made chili from canned goods and dried beans because the kitchen was stocked for exactly this kind of situation. Not lavishly, but practically, the way he'd maintained it. He didn't think of it as cooking for other people. He thought of it as a task that needed doing, like the generator and the perimeter. But when Sophie set the table and dragged the extra chairs from the back room, and the 4 of them sat around it with the evening coming through the windows, there was a particular quality to the silence before anyone spoke that he didn't have a clean name for. Not peaceful, exactly. More like the eye of something. "The financial trail runs through 4 shell companies before it hits Draper," Claire said, not quite at the table and not quite separate from it. She'd brought her laptop over and was eating with one hand and reading with the other, which was probably how she always ate, Logan suspected, when no one was requiring her to be somewhere for the optics of it. Each one is registered in a different jurisdiction, standard layering. But the timing of the transfers correlates exactly with Voss's budget authorization cycles. "Can you prove correlation in a way that holds legally?" Logan said. "Not yet. I need one more layer stripped back. There's a holding company called Meridian Pacific that I think is the bridge between Draper's operational funds and Voss's authorization chain. If I can access Meridian Pacific's incorporation records and cross-reference the board members, how do you get those records? I have a lawyer who specializes in exactly this kind of forensic corporate work. She's done it for me twice before. I called her this morning. She's working on it." Sophie looked up from the book she'd been reading beside her bowl. "What's a shell company?" "A company that exists on paper but doesn't actually do anything," Claire said, without the slight adjustment that most adults made when a child entered a conversation. "It's used to move money around without anyone being able to see where it's coming from or going. Like a fake name. Very much like a fake name." Sophie thought about this. "Dad has a kind of fake name." The table went briefly quiet in a specific way. "She means my work history has some gaps in it," Logan said. Sophie looked at him with the mild patience of someone enduring an imprecise description. "You told me your real name isn't the one on the mailbox. I told you that when you were 5 and you were not supposed to retain it." "I retain everything," she said, and went back to her book. Pharaoh, across the table, was making a very deliberate effort to look at his food. Claire looked at Logan for a moment with something that was not quite amusement and not quite anything else. A complicated expression that he didn't have time to interpret before she returned to her laptop. Meridian Pacific, she said. If the board members have any overlap with Voss's known associates, that's the connection we need. Torres can cross-reference names through back channels, Logan said. Send me the list when you have it. She nodded and went back to work, and they ate, and outside the window the last of the light left the sky, and the pine trees went dark, and somewhere down the road a night bird made a sound that carried clearly in the absence of city noise. The attack came on the second night. Not loudly, not the way it came in movies, where the first sign is a door kicked open and someone screaming. It came the way it came when professionals did it, with quiet first, a settling of the normal sounds, a particular stillness in the yard that Logan registered in his sleep before he was fully awake. He was up and off the bed with the gun from the bedside drawer in his hand before his eyes had adjusted. The clock on the nightstand read 2:11 a.m. He moved to the door of his room, opened it 2 inches, and listened. The house was dark. Sophie's room was across the hall, and her door was closed. The main room was empty, the embers of the evening's wood stove throwing faint orange light on the floor. The kitchen window was dark. But from the back of the house, toward the generator shed, he heard it. One sound, very small, the careful placement of a foot on gravel that was almost silent but not quite. Someone who was good but not perfect, or someone who wanted to be heard just enough to flush him out. He went to Sophie's door and opened it and touched her shoulder. She came awake fast. She always had, another thing he'd never trained for and couldn't explain. "Dad." "Under the bed," he said. "All the way to the wall. Don't come out until I come for you." She didn't ask questions. She slid off the mattress and went to the floor, and he pulled the bed frame slightly forward, and she went flat against the baseboard, and he pushed it back. Then he was in the hallway. He moved toward Pharaoh's room, which was closer to the back of the house, and found it empty. Pharaoh was already up, already at the back window, crouched low with his weapon in a two-handed grip. He looked at Logan and held up 2 fingers, then pointed, 2 at the back, at the tree line, moving toward the generator shed. Logan pointed at himself and toward the front of the house. Pharaoh nodded. They split. Logan moved through the main room and reached Claire's door and knocked twice with his knuckle. The code they'd established without calling it a code. Just a casual conversation on the first evening that had covered what 2 knocks meant, and what 3 meant, and what no knock at all meant. 2 meant quiet emergency. Move to the internal shelter position, which was the bathroom at the center of the house. No exterior walls. Her door opened before he knocked the second time. She was fully dressed. She had a phone in one hand and the prepaid in the other. "How many?" she said. "Minimum 2 back. Unknown front." He moved her toward the bathroom. "Stay in here. Lock it. If you hear anything that sounds like it's going wrong, the window above the toilet is 24 inches wide and it faces the creek. Go to the creek and follow it north for a 1/4 mile to the bridge. Pharaoh's car is 60 yards past the bridge on the left side of the road." "I know where the car is." "Then you know what to do." She looked at him, not afraid, not pretending not to be afraid either, somewhere in between, which was honest. "Logan." "Bathroom," he said. She went. He moved to the front of the house and positioned himself beside the main door, back to the wall, weapon up, and waited. The waiting was always the worst part. Not because of the fear. He'd made something like peace with fear a long time ago, but because of the thinking that happened in it. Sophie under the bed with her face against the baseboard. Claire in the bathroom with her 2 phones and her corporate records, and the evidence of a conspiracy that had reached all the way from a deputy director's office to a dirt road in the middle of nowhere. How they'd been found. Whether Torres had a leak. Whether the Carver property had a record somewhere that someone with enough access had managed to surface. Whether any of it mattered compared to what happened in the next 4 minutes. 2 sounds from the back of the house. Sharp. Sequential. Pharaoh. Then a shadow fell across the front window. Logan moved. The door came open and he was behind it, and the man who came through was professional. He cleared the frame fast and swept left, which was the correct move, but Logan was right. And in the half-second it took for the man to correct his sweep, Logan already had the gun pressed to his ear. "Down," Logan said. All the way. The man went to his knees. He was carrying a suppressed weapon and wearing dark clothes, and had an earpiece that had gone quiet, which told Logan that the Pharaoh situation had resolved one way or another, and the communication channel had broken. He cuffed the man with the zip ties from the side table drawer. He'd staged them there on the first night, and it had seemed excessive at the time, and now it didn't, and moved to the back of the house. Pharaoh was in the kitchen, breathing harder than usual, with a cut above his left eye that was putting blood down the side of his face in a thin, steady line. Across from him, one man was on the floor unconscious, wrists secured. Another was against the kitchen wall with his hands up, looking at Pharaoh with the expression of someone who had been confident in his preparation and was now revising that assessment significantly. 4 total, Pharaoh said. There's a 4th outside. He ran. Let him run, Logan said. We want someone to go back and report. Pharaoh looked at him. Report what? That this didn't work and it cost him 3 people. Logan looked at the man against the wall. Who sent you? The man said nothing. Okay, Logan said. He wasn't going to do the thing movies suggested happened next, and the man against the wall could probably tell that. And it didn't change his silence because he was more afraid of whoever had sent him than of Logan. That was useful information in itself. Pharaoh, your head. It's superficial. Get it looked at anyway. He turned back to the room. We need to move the car, change the route, and get Sophie and Claire out within the hour. This location is burned. Pharaoh nodded and pressed the back of his hand against his forehead, checking the bleed rate. Logan went to Sophie's room and moved the bed frame, and she came out from the baseboard with dust on her shirt and her expression so carefully composed that it hurt him to look at. It's done, he said. I heard, she said. I know. Are you hurt? No. She looked at his hands. He was still holding the weapon. He put the safety on and moved it to the back of his waistband and crouched in front of her. Soph, I'm fine, she said, and her voice was steady, and he knew both things were true, that she was fine and that being fine was costing her something. She was 7 years old, and she had been pressed against a baseboard in the dark, listening to the sounds of her father doing the things she knew he could do but had never fully heard. I'm sorry, he said. She pressed her lips together. Then she put both arms around his neck, and he held her for a moment in the dim light of her room, and he could feel her trying not to shake, and then just shaking slightly, which was honest and which was okay. Are we going to be okay? She asked into his shoulder. Yes, he said. Not because he was certain, but because he understood the difference between what she was asking and what she was asking. She wasn't asking for a tactical assessment. She was asking if he was still her father, still the person who put his arm around her and meant it, and was not going to stop. The answer to that was yes, without qualification. He felt her breathe out slowly. Okay, she said. Where are we going? I don't know yet. Somewhere safe. With Claire? Yes. She pulled back and looked at him. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. She didn't scream, Sophie said. When it happened. I thought she might, but she didn't. She didn't, Logan agreed. That's good, Sophie said, with the authority of someone delivering a verdict. I think she's a real person. He stood up. Let's pack. Claire was in the kitchen when Logan came through, helping Pharaoh with the cut above his eye, using the first aid kit from the cabinet under the sink. She'd found it in the dark without asking where it was, which meant she'd cataloged the house on the first day. Logan noticed this and filed it. She looked at Logan over Pharaoh's shoulder. Sophie okay? She's packing. He looked at the 2 men secured on the floor. The 4th one ran. He'll report back within the hour. We have maybe 90 minutes before whoever sent these people decides on next steps. Where do we go? I have 2 options. One is a motel chain, cash payment, rotating rooms, standard evasion. The other is to stop running. He held her gaze. If we're in the field, they have the initiative. They can keep sending people. We can keep moving, but Sophie can't live in motels indefinitely, and every move creates exposure. You're saying we take the initiative back, Claire said. I'm saying you've been building a case for 6 days and Torres has been pulling threads from his end, and if there's enough there, enough that can be handed to someone who can make it undeniable, Then the play is to use it before they neutralize the ability to use it. Claire finished taping the bandage above Pharaoh's eye and stepped back. She looked at her hands, then at Logan. "My forensic attorney called this afternoon," she said, "while you were on the perimeter walk. Meridian Pacific's board has 3 members. One of them is a woman named Sorensen, who served as Voss's deputy chief of staff from 2016 to 2019. Logan was very still. "That's the bridge," he said. "That's the bridge," she confirmed. "Sorensen connects Voss to Draper through Meridian Pacific. If we have the transfer records, the altered after-action report, the Sorensen connection, and Torres's procurement overlap, that's not a theory. That's a documented conspiracy spanning 8 years that includes 3 deaths from your operation and an attempted assassination tonight." "It has to go to the right people," Logan said. "If it goes to anyone inside Voss's chain, it disappears." "I have a contact at the Senate Intelligence Oversight Committee," Claire said. "I've been careful about him for 3 years. Never used the relationship. Never asked for anything. I was keeping him for something I genuinely needed." She paused. "This qualifies." Pharaoh stood up from the chair, tested his balance, and picked up his weapon from the table. "I can drive," he said to both of them. Logan looked at Claire. The kitchen was dark except for the single lamp above the sink, and outside the windows the trees were silent, and somewhere in the house Sophie was packing her books, and her drawing supplies, and the deep-sea creature library book she hadn't finished, and the 2 men on the floor were breathing and quiet, and everything was balanced on something very thin. "Make the call," Logan said. Claire picked up the prepaid phone. He went to help Sophie pack and thought about the name at the bottom of that authorization document and about 3 men who had died in a prepared ambush 8 years ago because someone in an office had decided they were expendable, and about what it meant that he was still alive and still angry and had stopped running and had people around him who were not going to scatter. He'd spent 4 years building a life that demanded no attention from the world. The world had paid attention anyway. He was done apologizing for existing. They drove through the rest of the night. Pharaoh took the first shift behind the wheel of Claire's car, and Logan followed in his truck with Sophie asleep in the back seat under a blanket she'd pulled from her bag without being asked. She'd been asleep within 20 minutes of leaving the Carver property, which was either a sign of genuine exhaustion or the particular resilience of a child who had learned to rest when rest was available because she couldn't always predict when it wouldn't be. Logan suspected both were true. He drove and thought. The 4th man, the one who'd run, would have reported back by now. Whoever had sent the team to the Carver property would know the operation had failed, and 3 of his people were in zip ties on a farmhouse floor waiting for a county sheriff to find them in the morning, which Logan had arranged via an anonymous call from a gas station payphone 40 minutes out of town. He wasn't interested in what happened to the 3 men. He was interested in what the failure would do to Voss. A man like Voss had 2 modes when something went wrong. He either pulled back and waited and let the problem age, or he escalated. The pulling back mode required patience and the reasonable belief that the problem would resolve itself. Voss didn't have that luxury anymore. Claire had the Sorensen connection. Torres had the procurement records. Pharaoh's contact had the altered after-action document. Sitting on 3 separate pieces of evidence held by 3 separate people who were not going to quietly disappear was not a problem that aged well. It was a problem that compounded, which meant Voss would escalate, which meant the window between now and when he moved again was the only window that mattered. Logan's phone buzzed on the seat beside him. Torres. "Talk to me," Logan said. "The Senate contact, Claire's guy, Senator Hale's office. I know Hale slightly from a debrief I did in 2019. He's not a man who grandstands, and he's not a man who buries things for convenience. If Claire trusts him, I think that trust is sound." Torres paused. "But Logan, there's a timing problem. Hale is in recess. His staff is skeletal until Monday. If we go through official channels before Monday, the filing goes to a duty officer who almost certainly reports up through a chain that has exposure to Voss's network." "Today is Friday," Logan said. "It's 4:15 in the morning on Friday, yes. So we have roughly 72 hours before we can move through a channel that doesn't leak." "Or we find Hale directly," Torres said, "bypassing his staff entirely. Claire would know how to reach him. She said she'd never used the relationship. She'd never needed to before. Logan watched the road in the headlights. The highway was nearly empty at this hour, just the occasional truck running the overnight route, red lights bleeding into the dark ahead of him. There's a second problem. The three men at the farmhouse, once law enforcement picks them up, whatever identification they're carrying is going to go somewhere, and if any part of that chain touches Voss's operation, he knows the clock started. I'd give him 8 hours from the sheriff's call before he knows, Torres said. Maybe 12 if we're lucky. We're not usually lucky. No, Torres agreed. We're usually careful, which is better. Logan was quiet for a moment, watching the road. I need you here, Marcus. Not on the phone. Torres didn't answer right away, which was its own kind of answer. He had a hardware store in Phoenix and a life he'd built around its edges and a knee that had never fully recovered from Kandahar and 2 grandchildren who visited on alternate weekends. He had extracted himself from exactly this kind of situation with exactly the same care that Logan had, and asking him to step back into it was not a small thing. Where are you going? Torres said. Still deciding. Somewhere in the city. A hotel, probably. Somewhere visible and ordinary, not a place that looks like hiding. Hide in plain sight? Something like that. Another pause. Give me until 8 a.m., Torres said. I'll call you from the road. Logan hung up and drove, and ahead of him Claire's car moved through the dark with its steady taillights, and in the back seat Sophie's breathing was slow and regular, and the night was very large around them. They took 2 rooms at a mid-range hotel near the airport, the kind of place that had the anonymous quality of transit, where nobody stayed long enough to remember the face next to them at breakfast, and the parking lot had enough turnover that 2 additional cars registered as nothing. Logan paid cash at the front desk using a name attached to a backup identity he'd maintained since before Sophie was born. He did not examine how it felt to use it after 4 years of trying not to need it. Sophie woke up when he carried her through the lobby, blinked at the fluorescent lights, and said, Are we at an airport? Hotel, near one. Okay. She went back to sleep against his shoulder. He put her in one of the beds, and she was under again in 30 seconds. Farrow took the chair by the window in Logan's room with his weapon on his knee and his eyes on the parking lot, and did not seem to require sleep, or at least had suspended the requirement indefinitely. Logan had known people like that in the service. Men who could dial the biological need down to something barely operational for as long as the situation demanded, and then collapse thoroughly when it ended. Farrow was one of those. Claire was at the small desk with her laptop open before the door was fully closed. Hale's personal number, she said, without looking up. I have it. He gave it to me 2 years ago after I helped fund a veterans housing initiative his office was running. He said if I ever needed to reach him directly, to use it. She looked at the phone in her hand. 4:50 a.m. is not a normal hour to call a sitting senator. What's the alternative, Zog? Logan said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she dialed. It rang 4 times. 5. Then a voice, rough with sleep, carrying the slightly compressed clarity of someone who had learned over decades to come awake fast. This is Hale. Senator, it's Claire Donovan. I apologize for the hour. A pause. Ms. Donovan. His voice sharpened. Are you safe? At the moment. That may change by morning. She put the call on speaker and set the phone on the desk, and Logan stayed out of the line of the device but close enough to hear. I need to send you something, and I need you to receive it in a way that doesn't go through your regular staff channels. I'm going to explain why when you've looked at what I'm sending, but the short version is that one of your fellow oversight committee members has a long-standing working relationship with the subject of the documents. Another pause. The sound of movement on the other end. Someone sitting up in bed, turning on a lamp. How long have you been sitting on this? Parts of it for 6 days. The complete picture. Approximately 14 hours. How many people have the full picture? Claire looked at Logan. 4, she said. All right. Hale's voice had shed the sleep entirely now. I'm going to give you an address, not my office address, a personal one. You send the documents there, encrypted, and I will have my personal counsel, not my staff, my personal attorney, review them before I see them formally. That creates a legal buffer that makes what I do with it afterward considerably cleaner. That works, Claire said. Ms. Donovan. He paused. The name at the top of whatever you're about to send me. I want to know it before I see the documents so I can control my own reaction when I do. That matters for what comes after. She glanced at Logan again. Harlan Voss, she said. The silence on the line lasted long enough that Logan counted it. 4 seconds. 5. Send me everything, Hale said, and hung up. They spent Friday in the hotel room, and it was the strangest day Logan had spent in years. Not because of the danger, which he was capable of sitting with, but because of the forced proximity and the waiting. He had always been bad at waiting when he couldn't do anything to affect the outcome. He'd compensated for it his whole career by filling the waiting with preparation, which was useful, but there was a ceiling on how much preparation the current situation could absorb. The documents were sent. Torres was on the road. Hale was moving. The rest was out of his hands for the first time since the jewelry store, and the feeling of that was not relief. Sophie woke up at 7:30 and took in the hotel room with mild interest and asked if there was breakfast. There was a vending machine down the hall, and a continental spread in the lobby that Logan walked her to while Farrow held the room and Claire stayed on the encrypted channel with her attorney. Sophie selected a bagel and a small container of cream cheese and an orange juice and ate at one of the lobby tables with the precise efficiency of someone who had learned not to be picky about food in unfamiliar circumstances. "Are you scared?" Logan asked her, because he had decided some time ago that pretending the situation was different than it was did not help Sophie and only made him feel better. She considered the question while applying cream cheese to the bagel. "A little, not like last night. Last night it was a lot." She looked at the cream cheese container. "Are you scared?" "Yes," he said. "Different kind of scared. I'm scared of making the wrong move and having it matter to people I care about." She looked up at him. "That's because of me." "Partly. And Claire. And Farrow." "You care about Claire?" She asked it with the guilelessness of a child asking a factual question. No subtext, just genuine inquiry. He looked at his coffee. "I think I'm still figuring that out." Sophie ate her bagel. "She looked at you last night," she said, "when we were in the kitchen after the guys came. Like she was checking if you were okay before she checked if she was okay. I saw it." He looked at his daughter. "You're 7, he said. "I know," she said. "That doesn't make it wrong." He drank his coffee and did not pursue the subject, and Sophie finished her breakfast and announced she was going back to her deep-sea book. And they walked back to the room, and Logan thought about what a 7-year-old's clarity cost a person to receive. Torres arrived at 2 in the afternoon, which was faster than Logan had expected. He was a compact, careful-moving man in his mid-40s with a salt-and-pepper beard he'd grown since the last time Logan had seen him in person, and the knee was worse than he'd let on the phone. Logan could see it in the way he stepped off the elevator, the slight adjustment of weight distribution that a person made when they'd learned to compensate for something rather than fix it. He shook Logan's hand and held it for a second longer than a regular handshake, and Logan understood that the extra second was not sentiment, but a man communicating that he'd chosen to be here and was not resentful of that choice, and that they were still the same 2 people they'd been for 20 years. "Torres," Claire said from the desk. "Ms. Donovan." He looked at her, then at the laptop, then at the board she'd constructed on the wall. Papers taped in a hierarchy, connected with pen lines, names circled in different colors. "That's Voss at the top." "Yes." He studied it for a moment. "You built this in 6 days." "I had good source material," she said with a look at Logan. "And I was motivated." Torres set his bag down and pulled out a folder. "The procurement records," he said, handing it to her. "Physical copies from a source that will not be traceable to anyone in this room. The relevant sections are flagged." He looked at Logan. 16 contract authorizations between Voss's office and Draper's holding company over a 4-year period. Total value just under $11 million, all classified as operational support for programs that have since been dissolved and the records archived. "Archived where?" Logan said. "That's the part that matters. 3 of the archives are at a facility in Virginia that falls under the jurisdiction of the Senate Intelligence Oversight Committee." Torres let that land. "Meaning Hale's committee has direct subpoena authority over those records without having to go through the executive branch's declassification process." Claire looked up from the documents. He can pull the originals independently, without Voss being able to suppress them, Torres confirmed. The executive branch can't block a legislative subpoena for records already under legislative custodianship. Voss would have to get a court order, which requires explaining in a court filing why a senator's committee should be prevented from accessing records it already owns, which is not a conversation he wants to have in a document that becomes part of the public record. The room was quiet for a moment. That's the corner, Logan said. Torres nodded. He can't suppress it legally without exposing himself. He can't run an operation against you without that operation being potentially attributable to him in light of the timing. And he can't do nothing because the documents are already with Hale, and Hale is not someone who sits on things. He looked at the wall board. He has maybe one move left, and it's not a good one. What's the move? Claire asked. He tries to negotiate, Logan said. He reaches out, probably through Draper, possibly through an attorney, and he offers a version of this that he controls. A limited admission, a quiet resignation, something that lets him shape the narrative. It's what people like him do when the alternative is the thing they can't survive. Will Hale let him negotiate? Farrow said from the window. That depends on what Hale decides the 3 people who died in 2017 are worth, Logan said. And the flatness in how he said it was not anger, just a plain accounting of something that had been unaccounted for a long time. But Hale called Claire at 6:15. She put it on speaker without being asked, and all 4 of them were in the room. Logan on the bed, Torres at the table, Farrow at the window, Sophie in the far corner with her headphones on, and her book, which she'd agreed to use as cover for the duration of the call without being asked to do so. I've had my counsel review the documents, Hale said. He sounded different than he had at 5 in the morning. Less raw, more formal, but with something underneath the formality that was neither comfortable nor resolved. They're credible. The Sorensen connection is the cleanest thread. Her incorporation records are a matter of public filing, and the cross-reference to Voss's deputy chief of staff record is not ambiguous. What about the after-action report? Logan said. A brief pause. Mr. Barrett, I was told you might be on this call. I was in the operation, Logan said. 3 of my people died because someone told the target we were coming. I know, Hale said, and said it with the weight of someone who had spent the day reading what had happened. The altered document is compelling, but it's a single record. My counsel says it would be stronger with the original for comparison. The originals are in the Virginia archive, Torres said, under your committee's custodianship. Hale was quiet for a moment that told Logan he'd either already known this or had just been told and was processing the significance. If I issue a subpoena for those records, it becomes a formal legislative action. It goes on a calendar. Voss will know within hours. We know, Logan said. That's why the timing matters. You issue it Monday, not before. Over the weekend, the 3 people from the farmhouse operation are in county custody, and the arrest report has been filed. Once it's filed, it's public record. Draper's name is in the arrest report because the lead man had Draper's contact information in his wallet, which was not smart tradecraft but was very convenient for us. Draper's name in an arrest report connected to an assault at a remote property, Hale said slowly, publicly filed. By Monday morning, anyone looking can see Draper's name in connection with a criminal matter. You subpoena the archives at the same time, and you simultaneously have a credentialed journalist. I assume you know credentialed journalists. Several, Hale said dryly. You have one of them file a public records request for the 2017 after-action report under the existing archive reference number, which is in the documents Claire sent you. The request generates a paper trail. If Voss tries to suppress the subpoena, the journalist's request is already in the system from a different angle. The silence on the line had the quality of someone running through a sequence very fast. You've done this before, Hale said. Not a question. I've been on the other side of it, Logan said. I know where the pressure points are. All right, Hale said. I'll have my counsel draft the subpoena over the weekend. I need something from you in return. What? Your account, written. The operation as you experienced it. What you were told before insertion, what happened, what you understood afterward. Not for publication. For the committee record. If this goes to formal proceedings, a first-person account from a surviving operator carries weight that documents alone don't. Logan looked at the wall where Claire had built her connection map. At Voss's name at the top, connected downward through Sorensen and Draper and Kellner to a jewelry store robbery and a man at a school and a farmhouse in the dark. At 3 names that were not on the map because they were only in his memory and in an official file that had been altered to misrepresent how they died. "I'll write it," he said. "Tonight, if possible. My counsel can receive it through the same encrypted channel." "Tonight," Logan confirmed. After the call, the room was very quiet. Torres stood up and stretched, and his knee made a sound that he ignored. "I need coffee," he said, and went to the machine in the corner and made it badly, because the hotel machine was the kind that dispensed more hot water than coffee, and drank it anyway without complaining. Farrow had turned from the window. "If Voss hears about Draper's name in the arrest report before Monday, he'll hear," Logan said. "The question is what he does with it." "He runs or he comes at you again." "He runs," Claire said from the desk. All 3 men looked at her. She had been quiet for the last few minutes, looking at the wall map. "He's not a field man. He's an architect. He builds structures and he puts other people in them. When the structure fails, he doesn't rebuild it under fire. He cuts the connection and starts distancing." She looked at Logan. "He's going to try to make Draper the endpoint. He'll let Draper take the weight and claim he was a rogue contractor who acted without authorization." "Can he make that stick?" Torres asked. "With the Sorensen connection and the procurement records, no," she said. "But he'll try. It's what people like him do. They try to reshape the story right up until the moment they can't." Her voice had a quality to it that was not entirely about Voss. Logan thought about what she'd said at the diner, the corporate world she'd spent years building. He thought about how she'd looked at the wall map while Hale was talking, and the expression she'd had at the end of the call, and the things she'd said about protecting people over power. He thought she was telling the truth when she said it. He thought she'd been telling the truth about most things since the beginning, which was rarer than it should have been. "I need to write the account," he said, standing. "Can I use the desk?" Claire moved without comment, taking her laptop to the bed. Logan sat at the desk and opened the document application on the hotel's complimentary tablet, which was underpowered and slow, and he started writing. He wrote for 3 hours. He wrote about the briefing in a room without windows where the intelligence officer had told them the target had been confirmed and the window was narrow. He wrote about the 12 hours before insertion, the preparation that felt right, the strange, specific clarity that came before an operation when everything reduced to the task. He wrote about going in and what they found and what happened in the first 60 seconds, and what he understood in those 60 seconds, and what he'd lived with since. He wrote the names: Kowalski, Reyes, Drummond. He wrote them in the document, and he wrote them carefully, their first names and last names and the states they'd come from, and the things he'd known about them. That Kowalski had a daughter born 6 months before the operation, that Reyes had been accepted to law school and was completing his last deployment, that Drummond had told Logan the night before insertion that he was going to ask his girlfriend to marry him when he got home. He wrote these things because they were true, and because a report that described 3 operator deaths as the result of planning failure had reduced those 3 people to a margin of error, and he wanted the record to contain something different. He did not write it for Hale exactly, though Hale would receive it. He wrote it because it had needed to be written for 8 years, and nobody had done it, and he was the one left. When he was done, he sat for a moment in the blue light of the tablet screen. Sophie had fallen asleep in the chair with her headphones still on and the Deep Sea book open on her chest. Torres had fallen asleep at the table in the way of a man who slept in positions of strategic readiness rather than comfort. Farrow was still at the window, still watching the parking lot, still requiring less sleep than the rest of the human species. Claire was awake. She was sitting on the bed with her laptop closed and her knees pulled up, and she was looking at the window, and when Logan looked at her, she looked back at him. "How are you?" she asked. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. She nodded slowly, like that was a real answer. "The account, was it? It needed doing," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "I keep thinking about something you said. At the construction site, the first morning. You said the difference now is that everything behind you matters." She looked at him carefully. "I think I understood it at the time. I understand it differently now." He looked at Sophie in the chair. "She asked me this morning if I care about you," he said. Claire's expression shifted, something opening in it briefly. What did you say? I said I was still figuring it out. That's fair, she said quietly. I'm still figuring it out too. It was not a resolution, and neither of them treated it as one. It was two people at the end of an exhausting and dangerous several days, in a hotel room that smelled like recycled air, saying something true to each other because they'd both run out of the energy required to say anything else. It was small and human and imprecise, and it was enough for the moment. He sent the account to Hale's counsel at 11:40 p.m. At 2:17 Saturday morning, Torres's phone rang. His contact at the county confirming that the arrest report had been filed and was in the public system. At 9 a.m. Saturday, Hale's office received a call from an attorney representing Royce Draper, requesting a preliminary conversation about the parameters of a possible cooperation agreement. Logan heard about the Draper call from Claire, who heard it from Hale's counsel, and he was standing in the hotel parking lot with his coffee when she told him, squinting in the morning light. He's cutting Draper loose, Logan said. Draper's cutting himself loose, Claire said. He knows his name is in the arrest report. He's deciding that cooperating is better than being the end point. Will he give up Voss? His attorney asked Hale's counsel what level of cooperation would be required for a favorable arrangement. Hale's counsel said complete and documented. She paused. Draper's attorney said they'd call back within the hour. Logan drank his coffee. The parking lot was ordinary. Cars pulling in and out. A family loading luggage. A man walking a dog on a retractable leash that kept extending too far. Normal Friday morning things on a Saturday that felt like it had no business being this quiet. He's going to give him up, Logan said. Yes, Claire said. He is. And then it's Voss and the documents and the subpoena and the committee. Yes. He looked at the sky. It was clear and pale and unremarkable. My daughter asked this morning if we could go home, he said. She didn't say our home specifically. She said home like it was a concept she was asking permission to want. Claire was quiet for a moment. What did you tell her? I told her soon. He looked at his coffee. I don't know what home means right now. The apartment in Millfield, that address is in a file somewhere. Whether it's safe after this, it won't be the same, Claire said. I know that. Whatever comes after, it won't be what was before. He looked at her. She was standing at the morning light in jeans and a jacket she'd borrowed from her overnight bag, and she looked like someone who had been through something real and was not pretending otherwise, and her hair was loose in a way he hadn't seen it before. What does it look like for you? He asked. After. She considered it genuinely, which he appreciated. I've been thinking about that, she said. The company, what I built, it's good. Parts of it are genuinely good, but I've been running it for reasons that have shifted so much from why I started that I'm not sure I recognize them anymore. She looked at the parking lot. The humanitarian foundation I've been funding quietly for 2 years, the one I never talk about publicly. I think I want to do that instead, properly, not as a side project. That's a significant change. This has been a significant week, she said, which was the understatement of things, and she said it with a slight wryness that was the first truly light thing she'd said in days, and it made him feel something specific that he still didn't have the right word for, but that was warmer than it had been before. Torres appeared in the parking lot doorway. Draper's attorney called back, he said. He's giving a full statement Monday morning. Logan set down his coffee on the hood of the car. Then we wait until Monday, he said. We wait until Monday, Torres agreed. Logan looked back at the hotel, toward the window where Farrow was presumably still watching the parking lot from the other direction, toward the room where Sophie was probably awake and reading about bioluminescent fish and waiting for her father to come back with breakfast. He walked back inside to get it. Monday came the way important days sometimes do, quietly, without ceremony, looking from the outside like any other morning. Logan was up before 5. He made coffee from the hotel machine that still dispensed more hot water than it should, and he stood at the window and watched the parking lot come awake in the early gray light. A delivery van, a man in scrubs heading to his car, a woman walking fast with her head down against the cold. Ordinary people moving through an ordinary morning. He had spent so many years trying to be one of them, trying to fit inside the frame of an ordinary life, and standing here now, he understood that the effort had never been dishonest. He had genuinely wanted it, the construction work, The apartment on the east side, the school pickups and the homework, and the dinner conversations and Sophie's drawings on every available surface. None of that had been performance. It had been real. It had been the most real thing he'd built since the Navy, and the fact that it existed alongside everything else he was didn't make it less true. He just understood now that he'd been trying to divide himself into the part worth keeping and the part worth discarding, and people didn't divide cleanly that way. You kept the whole thing, or you kept none of it, and the part he'd been trying to bury had saved Claire's life in a jewelry store and gotten his daughter through a farmhouse in the dark, and he was done being ashamed of it. Torres came out of the bathroom with his hair damp and a coffee in each hand and set one on the windowsill beside Logan without a word. That was the thing about Torres. Had always been the thing. He understood the difference between company and conversation and knew when the first was needed and the second wasn't. Draper's statement is at 9, Torres said. I know. Hale's counsel called at midnight. The subpoena for the Virginia archives was formally issued at 11:59 p.m. Sunday. It's on the record. I know that too. Torres drank his coffee. How do you feel? Logan looked at the parking lot, like a man who's been holding his breath for 8 years and doesn't know what it feels like to breathe normally. That takes a while, Torres said. To feel normal again. I remember when I got out, really out, not just relocated. It took me almost a year before I stopped checking exits in restaurants. Do you still check? Every time, Torres said without apology. I just don't mind it anymore. It's just part of how I see the world. Like your girl drawing cats into situations that didn't have them. She's improving the room. You're just keeping count of the doors. Logan looked at him. That's a better way to think about it, he said. Torres shrugged. I've had more time. Draper's statement ran to 61 pages. Logan didn't read all of it on Monday. He read the summary that Hale's counsel sent to Claire at 11 a.m., standing in the hotel room while Sophie sat on the bed beside him, doing the math homework she'd been carrying in her backpack through 3 different locations and 2 separate crises, working through it with the patient determination of a person for whom fractions were an inconvenience but not a defeat. Draper had given everything. He'd given the contract records, the communication logs, the operational briefings he'd received through Sorensen as a go-between. He'd given the 2017 operation specifically, confirmed that Voss had authorized the intelligence leak to the target as part of a side arrangement that predated Logan's unit's involvement, a deal that Voss had made with a foreign intermediary who was providing the original intelligence on the target and who had, in turn, sold the counterintelligence back to the target. 3 American operators had died because Harlan Voss had been running a financial arrangement on the side of an authorized operation and had chosen to let the operation proceed rather than abort it and expose what he'd done. Logan read that paragraph twice. Then he set the phone down and walked to the window. He had known, at some level, for 8 years. Not the specifics, not Voss's name, not the exact mechanism, but he had known, in the way that a person who survives something designed to kill them eventually understands that the design was not accidental. He'd known it and had nowhere to put it, and the not having somewhere had been a weight that he'd carried under everything, under the construction work and the apartment, and the school pickups, and the careful invisible life, without ever fully naming it. Now it had a name. He stood at the window for a while and let himself feel whatever the right word was for what he felt. And the word was not satisfaction, and it was not relief, and it was not rage, though all 3 were present in some proportion. The word was closer to grief, the specific grief of something that could not be undone, acknowledged at last, given its proper size and shape and weight and set down. Kowalski, Reyes, Drummond. They were still gone. The statement that named the reason didn't change that. The subpoena didn't change it. Whatever happened to Voss in a committee room or a courtroom didn't bring them back, and Logan had enough hard-won honesty about the world not to pretend otherwise. What it changed was the record. What it changed was the story that would exist after this, the one that would replace the one about planning failure and operational error. What it changed was whether those 3 people would be remembered accurately, and that was not nothing, and he was going to have to let it be enough because it was all that justice could actually do. He turned back to the room. Sophie was watching him over her math homework with the expression she got when she was deciding whether to say something. "What?" he said. "Nothing," she said. Then, "Are you okay?" "Working on it," he said. She considered this. "That's an honest answer." "I know. Most parents say yes," she said. "Most parents haven't had this particular week." She looked at her homework and then back at him. "The people who died," she said carefully, "in the thing that happened a long time ago. Were they your friends?" He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed beside her. "Yes." "I'm sorry." He looked at his daughter, at Dana's eyes and the stubborn chin and the hair tucked behind one ear, and thought about how children moved through grief differently than adults did, not because they felt it less, but because they hadn't yet learned to make it complicated. "Thank you, Soph," he said. She went back to her fractions. After a moment, she said, "Can we go somewhere and get actual food today? Not the vending machine." He almost laughed. "Yes. Something with eggs. I'll find you eggs. And not scrambled. Those spongy hotel scrambled eggs? Over easy, I know." She made a satisfied sound and put her pencil to the homework, and Logan sat there for another minute just being present in the room with her, which was the thing he had always found to be the most reliable anchor in any storm. Not the resolution of the storm, not the promise that it would end, just the fact of her being there, drawing cats into situations and demanding over-easy eggs, and being, in her particular stubborn way, the reason everything else was worth the trouble. Bam. Voss resigned his position at 4:17 p.m. Monday afternoon. The announcement came through official channels as a statement about pursuing other opportunities and transition in leadership, the standard language of a man exiting under duress while trying to maintain the fiction that he'd chosen it. It lasted approximately 6 hours before Hale's office issued a press statement confirming that the Senate Intelligence Oversight Committee had opened a formal investigation into the conduct of the former acting director, and that the investigation encompassed matters related to a classified operation in 2017 and subsequent administrative actions. Logan read the press statement on Claire's phone, sitting in a diner 3 blocks from the hotel where he had found Sophie her over-easy eggs that morning. Claire was across from him. Torres was in the parking lot making a call. Farrow had driven back to the city 2 hours earlier, his job having shifted from immediate protection to something more like an open question that nobody had formally closed. "It's not over," Logan said. "No," Claire agreed. "The investigation will take months, probably longer. There will be hearings and Voss will have attorneys, and the attorneys will slow things down as long as they can." "But it's moving. It's moving," she said. "And it's public. That's the thing that can't be undone now. Whatever Voss's attorneys do, the investigation is on record, and Draper's cooperation is on record, and your account is in the committee's possession." She looked at him steadily. "He can't make it disappear. That window is closed." Logan set the phone down on the table. Outside the diner window, the street moved through its ordinary Monday afternoon rhythms. Cars, pedestrians, a woman pushing a stroller, a delivery cyclist threading through traffic. The city did not care about Harlan Voss or classified operations or 8 years of buried truth. The city was just the city, continuous and indifferent and enormous, which was actually a comfort in its way. "What happens to you now?" he asked. "The company?" She looked at the table for a moment. "I've been on the phone with my board chair since Saturday. The public exposure of the Donovan Group's involvement in the robbery, the subsequent events, it's going to create a period of instability. Some investors will pull back. Some of our partners will need reassurance." She paused. "My board chair thinks I should come back, manage the narrative, restore confidence." "What do you think?" She looked up at him. "I think I've been managing narratives for other people's confidence for 10 years, and I'm tired of it." She said it plainly, without drama, the way she said most things. "I started the company because I genuinely believed in what development capital could do for under-resourced communities. I believed that for about 3 years. After that, I was mostly running the machine because the machine had momentum, and stopping it felt like failure." She traced the rim of her coffee cup. "The Humanitarian Foundation, the one I mentioned. I've been funding it quietly because I didn't want anyone to think I was doing it for the optics, which is its own kind of problem, because I ended up doing it privately enough that it's been operating at half the capacity it could have." "You were protecting it from the thing you'd built," Logan said. She looked at him sharply, then less sharply. "Yes," she said, "that's exactly right. I was keeping it separate from the machine. She paused. I've decided I'm going to step down as CEO. Transition the company to the current COO, who's been running it functionally for 2 years anyway, and I'm going to build the foundation properly, publicly, with the full resources it needs. That's not a small decision. No, it's also not a hard one anymore. She met his gaze. Some things become clear when you've spent a week being reminded what actually matters. He held her gaze for a moment. There was something between them that had been building since a diner called Marcy's, and had grown through construction sites and late-night calls and farmhouse darkness, and it was not simple and it was not resolved, and both of them knew that the timing was impractical and the circumstances were complicated, and neither of their lives looked like what they'd looked like 3 weeks ago. But they were also both adults who had made enough hard assessments to recognize a true thing when they were sitting across from it in a diner. I don't know what my life looks like from here, Logan said. The apartment's probably compromised. Sophie needs a new school in a new place. My work history it's complicated now that my background is in a congressional record. He paused. I'm not saying any of that to be... I know why you're saying it, she said. I'm saying the practical version of things is messy, and I don't have clean answers to it. Neither do I, she said. I'm walking away from the thing that defined me professionally for a decade. I don't know exactly who I am without it yet. She tilted her head slightly. We could be uncertain together, if that's a thing you're open to, slowly, without requiring it to be anything it isn't yet. Logan looked at her. That's the most careful offer I've ever received, he said. I'm a careful person. You're a precise person, he said. There's a difference. Something in her expression softened, briefly and genuinely, in the way that happened when she wasn't managing how she appeared to anyone. He'd caught it a few times, and each time it had the quality of something rare, not because she was cold the rest of the time, but because she was so consistently composed that the moments when the composure came down meant something specific. Yes, she said. I'm open to uncertain together. Slowly, he said. Slowly, she agreed. Torres appeared in the diner doorway, shook some cold off his jacket, and slid into the booth beside Logan. Voss's attorney issued a statement, he said. Calls the investigation politically motivated and says his client looks forward to cooperating fully. He'll cooperate fully right up until the moment the records from the Virginia archive arrive, and then his attorney will discover 14 procedural objections, Logan said. Obviously, Torres said, but it doesn't matter. The records are subpoenaed and the investigation is public, and Draper already flipped. At this point, Voss is just an old man writing checks to lawyers until the checks run out or the evidence gets too heavy. He flagged down the server and ordered coffee and a slice of pie without looking at the menu, which Logan found both typical and correct. What are you two going to do? We were just discussing that, Claire said. Torres looked at Logan, and in the brief, precise communication of people who had known each other for 20 years, something passed between them, a question asked and answered without words. Logan gave the faintest nod. Torres looked back at his coffee with the expression of a man who had received information he'd been expecting and was satisfied to have it confirmed. New city, Logan said, for Sophie and me. Somewhere that doesn't have connections to anything current. I have enough cleared contacts now, with Hale's committee involved, that I can get a proper clean documentation package. Real, not layered. First time in years I'd be living under my actual name with actual paperwork. Torres looked up. Hale's office offered that? His counsel mentioned it would be a natural component of the formal clearance of my record. When the 2017 operation is officially reclassified as a betrayal rather than a planning failure, the adverse administrative actions that followed my exit get reviewed. Logan looked at the table. I didn't think about that until she said it on the phone, that the clearance of the record means I get my name back, properly. Torres was quiet for a moment. Logan Michael Barrett, he said, like he was testing how it sounded out loud in a public place. Just like that. Not just like that, 6 months of committee process probably, but at the end of it, yeah. Torres's jaw shifted slightly in the way it did when he was containing something. He picked up his coffee and drank it. Good, he said simply. That's good. Betty. They left the city 4 days later, not all at once, and not in a way that looked like leaving. Logan gave notice on the apartment via email, paid the last month, and left the key in the lockbox. He took 3 boxes of things that mattered: Sophie's books, her art supplies, the framed photograph of Dana from his nightstand, a few items of practical clothing, the legal pad with the connection map that he kept for reasons he couldn't entirely explain. He left behind the furniture, the kitchen equipment, the carefully anonymous life he'd assembled piece by piece. Sophie moved through the apartment one last time on the morning they left, touching things without picking them up. The bookshelf he'd built her, the kitchen stool, the window that faced the parking lot that she'd always said had a boring view. She spent about 3 minutes in her room doing this, and then she came out and put her backpack on and said she was ready. "You okay?" he asked. "It was a good apartment," she said. "I'll miss the bookshelf. I'll build you another one." She looked at him steadily. "A bigger one." "Done." She went to the door, then she stopped and turned back and looked at the apartment one more time, with the particular look of a child archiving something, taking a clean mental photograph, cataloging it, putting it somewhere she'd be able to find it. Then she walked out and Logan took the boxes, and he didn't look back because he'd learned that looking back at the things you were leaving generally didn't add anything useful. The new city was on the coast. He'd been there once, years before, for a weekend that had nothing to do with an operation or a cover or anything except that Torres had been passing through and had called him, and they'd spent 2 days eating seafood and walking the waterfront like civilians, which they'd both been in the middle of pretending to become. He'd remembered it as a city that felt genuinely inhabited, not a transit point, not a place where people landed temporarily, but somewhere people had chosen deliberately and then stayed in because the choosing had been right. He put down a deposit on a house 3 blocks from the water. It had a yard with a tree that Sophie examined for 5 minutes before announcing it was climbable, and a kitchen with good light, and a third room that could be a study or an office or whatever he decided he was doing with himself next. The neighborhood had a school 3/4 of a mile away that the realtor described as solid without overselling it, which Logan appreciated because he'd learned to distrust enthusiasm about things that needed to be evaluated directly. He enrolled Sophie on a Thursday. She was nervous in the way she never quite admitted to being nervous, by reading in the car on the way there with extreme concentration, more concentration than the book required. Logan parked, and she put the book in her bag and got out and looked at the school building with the expression of a person assessing whether this was going to be survivable. "New schools are hard," he said. "I know. You've done it before. I know that too." She straightened her backpack straps. "It doesn't get easier just because you've done it." "No," he agreed. "But you get better at it." She looked at him. "Did you get better at hard things by doing them?" He thought about an honest answer. Sometimes I just got used to them, which isn't the same thing. I got better at some things. Some things I just learned to carry." She considered this with the gravity she gave to things that she intended to think about later. Then she walked toward the front entrance and he walked beside her, and the morning was clear and cold, and the school looked like a school, and somewhere inside it there were teachers and a science fair season and a library and kids who didn't know her yet but would, and it was not perfect, and it was not easy, and it was real. She looked at him from the door. "You'll be here at 3?" "I'll be here at 3, he said. She went in. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment after the door closed. In the clear coastal morning, with the sound of the water a few blocks away if he listened for it. He had nowhere to be until 3. He had not had a day with nowhere to be since before the jewelry store, and the feeling of it was disorienting in the specific way of a person whose body had been running on emergency current for so long that ordinary current felt like the power was out. He walked to the waterfront. He bought a coffee from a cart operated by a man who was clearly thinking about 3 other things while he made it, and he sat on a bench facing the water and drank it and watched the boats and the birds and the light moving on the surface of the water, and he allowed himself to simply be in a place without cataloging its exits or assessing its angles or processing anything at all. He was not good at it. His eyes kept moving, kept catching details, kept doing the work. But he sat with it rather than against it, and after a while the cataloging became less urgent and the details became just details, and the water became just water, and he was just a man on a bench with a mediocre coffee, which was something. He thought about Kowalski and Reyes and Drummond, the way he always did when things went quiet. He thought about them not with the old weight of unanswered questions, but with something simpler and more personal. Just the fact of them, who they'd been, the particular collection of habits and irritants and decencies that made them individuals rather than casualties. He thought about Kowalski's daughter, who would be 8 or 9 now, growing up without a father because someone in an office had made a calculation. He thought about Reyes, who would have been a good lawyer. He thought about Drummond, who never got to ask his question. There was nothing he could do about any of it, and he had always known that. But the truth meant something different now that the record said what had actually happened. It meant they were no longer men who had died in a planning failure. They were men who had been betrayed and killed and lied about, and the record said so now, and the record would persist. That was the only thing that could be given back to them, and it had been given, and Logan was going to have to let it be enough. And mostly it was. He finished his coffee. Claire called on a Friday, 3 weeks after the coastal city, while he was in the yard building the bookshelf. He had the wood laid out on sawhorses and the measurements marked in pencil and Sophie's specifications written on a piece of paper clipped to the sawhorse. 7 shelves instead of 6, the bottom one deep enough for the oversized art book she'd decided she needed. A small lip on each shelf to keep things from sliding when the weather changed and the house shifted. She had researched shelf lips specifically, which was the most Sophie thing he could imagine. "How's the coast?" Claire asked. "Cold today," he said. "Good cold. Not bad cold. Is there a difference?" "The kind that comes off the water feels cleaner than the city kind." He realized as he said it that he was describing something he'd noticed and cataloged as pleasant, which meant the place was working on him. Sophie got into the science club at the new school. "She called me from the school office to tell me." "From the office? Not a text?" "She doesn't have a phone yet. She borrowed the secretary's phone, which the secretary apparently found charming enough to allow." A sound from Claire that was the full version of the smile, not the precursor. It was a sound he'd heard more in the last few weeks than before, which he noticed without making it into more than it was. "The foundation filed its formal nonprofit status," she said, "as of Tuesday. We have 2 full-time staff starting in January and 3 programs ready to launch in the spring." That was fast. "I had the structure drafted 2 years ago," she said. "I just never pulled the trigger. Turns out once you decide, the rest moves quickly." A pause. "I also finished the transition agreement with the company. Marcus, my COO, he's official as of December 1st. How does it feel?" She was quiet for a moment. "Strange. Like taking off a coat you've been wearing so long you forgot it was a coat." Another pause. "Lighter, mostly. Some days I miss it. Not the work exactly, more the feeling of running something large. The scale of it." "You'll have scale," he said. "Different kind." "Yes." He could hear her thinking. "The first program is a housing access initiative for veterans transitioning out of service. It felt right to start there." He set down the pencil he'd been holding. "Claire." "I know," she said. "It wasn't calculated. Or it was, a little. But it was also just the thing that made sense to start with." He looked at the marked wood on the sawhorses, at the penciled measurements and Sophie's specifications, and the clear coastal sky above the yard. He thought about the world as it had been 6 weeks ago, and the world as it was now. And the difference between them was not simply that the danger had passed. It was that the reason for the danger had been named, and the record had been corrected, and the people responsible had been made to account for it in the only ways that remained available. And here he was, building a bookshelf. "When are you coming to see the coast?" he said. The pause had a particular quality to it. "Sophie invited me," she said, 2 weeks ago, by email. From her teacher's computer, apparently." He stared at the sawhorse. "She emailed you." She said, and I am quoting, "Dad won't ask you himself because he is being careful, but careful is just a different word for scared sometimes, and he taught me that scared doesn't mean you shouldn't do the thing." She signed it, Sophie Ann Barrett. Another pause. "She spelled everything correctly." Logan pressed his hand flat against the top of the sawhorse and looked at the yard for a moment. The tree that Sophie had declared climbable was losing its leaves in the November cold, dropping them in irregular intervals across the grass in a way that was going to require raking, which Sophie had also declared she wanted to help with because she'd never had a yard before. "She's 7, he said. She is significantly more than 7, Claire said. He thought about Sophie across the kitchen table saying careful is just a different word for scared sometimes, in the matter-of-fact tone of a child reporting something she'd discovered and found reliable. He thought about where she'd gotten that, whether it was something he'd said without realizing he'd been teaching, or something she'd arrived at on her own, through the particular quiet intelligence she'd been born with and had never stopped developing. He thought she'd probably arrived at it herself. She usually did. "Come see the coast," he said. "When?" "Whenever you're ready. There's no deadline." "I'll come in 2 weeks," she said, "if that's all right." "2 weeks is good," he said. "I'll have the bookshelf done by then. Sophie will want to show you." "I look forward to it," she said, and she meant it, and he could tell she meant it, and neither of them said anything that made it bigger than it was, which was exactly right. After the call, he stood in the yard for a while in the November cold with his hands in his jacket pockets, and the wood waiting on the sawhorses and the tree losing its leaves in irregular intervals. And he thought about the strange and non-linear path that had run from a jewelry store to a diner, to a construction site, to a farmhouse in the dark, to a hotel room, to this yard on the coast, and how none of it had been planned, and all of it had been necessary, and somewhere in the middle of surviving it, he had stopped being a man who was hiding from what he was, and had become, with considerable difficulty and a lot of broken glass along the way, something closer to a man who had made his peace with it. He was not repaired. He did not think of himself that way and would have been suspicious of anyone who suggested it. He was still a man who checked exits and slept light and would never fully stop scanning a room when he walked into it. He still carried the weight of 2017 in a way that would probably not fully lift, and he understood that the committee investigation and Voss's resignation and Draper's statement had been justice in the only form justice could actually take. Imperfect, incomplete, arrived at too late for the people who deserved it most. That was the truth of it, and he was not going to pretend otherwise. But Sophie had a yard and a climbable tree and a school where she'd called him from the secretary's phone to announce the science club. And somewhere in this city there was a coffee cart run by a man who was always thinking about 3 other things, and the water was 3 blocks away. And it sounded different here than water sounded anywhere else he'd lived. And 2 weeks from now, Claire Donovan was coming to see it. And he was building a bookshelf. He picked up the pencil and went back to work. He made 7 shelves, the bottom one deep, each with a small lip to keep things from sliding when the house shifted. He worked until the light changed and the cold came up properly from the water. And when he heard the front door open and Sophie's backpack hit the floor of the entryway he was sanding, the 3rd shelf and the yard smelled like cutwood and salt air. "Dad," she called from inside. "Yard," he called back. She appeared in the back doorway with her coat still on and her hair loose from whatever it had been when she left that morning, and she looked at the sawhorses and the wood and the shelves taking shape. "That's it," she said. "It's in progress." She came down into the yard and walked around the sawhorses, looking at the work from different angles with the critical eye of a person who had written specifications. "The bottom shelf looks deep enough. Per your requirements," he said. She crouched and looked at the lip on the edge of the 2nd shelf, running her finger along it. "Good lip," she said, with the authority of someone who had researched lips. "Thank you." She stood up and looked at him. "Claire's coming in 2 weeks. Kept sanding. I know. I emailed her." "I know that too." She looked at the shelf in his hands. "Are you mad?" He set down the sandpaper and looked at his daughter. 7 years old, Dana's eyes, the stubborn chin, hair tucked behind one ear, wearing a backpack that was slightly too large for her because she insisted on fitting all the books in it every day rather than leaving any at school. "No," he said. "You're sure?" "Sophie, I just thought I know what you thought," he said. "And you were right. That doesn't mean you should make a habit of it." She considered this carefully. "Does that mean right this time, but not always?" "It means right this time, and we'll evaluate case by case." She accepted this with the nod of someone entering a negotiation they found favorable. Then she looked at the bookshelf again. "Can I help sand?" "The last shelf, not the ones already done." "Obviously not the ones already done," she said, with the mild patience of someone correcting an unnecessary specification, and she held out her hand for the sandpaper. He gave it to her. She went to work on the last shelf with the concentration she brought to everything. Thorough, unhurried, not flashy. She followed the grain the way he'd showed her once on a weekend project, barely remembering having been taught, just doing it the right way because that was how she did things. The afternoon light went long and gold across the yard. Logan sat on the back step and watched his daughter work and listened to the water 3 blocks away and thought about a man named Carver who had left him a property in his will, and a man named Torres who had driven through the night when he was needed, and 3 men whose names were now in a congressional record saying what had actually happened to them, and a woman who was coming in 2 weeks to see the coast, and a 7-year-old who emailed people from her teacher's computer and wrote specifications for bookshelves, and drew cats into rooms that didn't have them, and said without flinching that careful was just a different word for scared sometimes. He thought, this is what it looks like. Not a victory, not an ending that resolves cleanly, or a life that suddenly makes sense. Just this. A yard, a tree, a bookshelf in progress, a daughter sanding the last shelf in the late afternoon light of a coastal city she'd never lived in before and had already decided was home. He had spent years measuring his strength by what he could endure, by the operations he'd survived and the things he'd carried and the life he'd managed to build in the spaces between one threat and the next. That was a real kind of strength, and he wasn't going to dismiss it. It had kept him and Sophie alive through things that would have broken someone less stubborn. But sitting on the back step of a house with good kitchen light 3 blocks from the water, watching Sophie sand the lip of a shelf she'd specified herself, he understood that the strength that had brought them here was not the same strength that would be required to stay. Staying required something different, not hardness but openness, not vigilance but presence, not survival, but the quieter and considerably harder work of actually living in a place instead of just enduring it. He was not sure he knew how to do that yet. He thought he was willing to learn. "Dad?" Sophie said, not looking up from the shelf. "Yeah." The last shelf is done. He stood up and came to look at it. The surface was smooth and even, and the lip was cleanly finished, and it was right. He ran his hand along it. "Good work," he said. She looked up at him with sawdust on her sleeve and the late light in her face. "Can we paint it white, like the old one?" "White," he confirmed. "Tomorrow?" "Tomorrow?" She leaned the shelf carefully against the sawhorse and dusted her hands against her jeans and looked at the half-finished bookshelf with the particular satisfaction of someone who had contributed something real to something real. "It's going to be a good bookshelf," she said. "Yeah," Logan said, "it is." The sun finished its work on the yard, and the cold came up off the water, and they went inside together, and the door closed behind them, and the yard held the sawdust and the light and the shape of the afternoon like a record of something ordinary that had been, in every way that counted, extraordinary.